We've got just a few more people coming in, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get rolling, guys. First, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jackie Lucas. I am the lab manager here at Indie Film Lab, and I really want to thank you guys for joining us today. This is something that we have been talking about and kind of dreaming about for a while, to be able to expand our reach and connect with people who are interested in film, but have maybe been a little bit intimidated to start, and to just get you guys in on the ground level. An introduction to film class is something that we wanted to be able to open up to a broad audience, and fortunately we've been able to do that with Zoom. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We're really excited and hope that this is going to be the first of many classes that we'll be able to host in the future. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce you guys to your instructors for the day. Ryan Muirhead and Josh Moates are going to be taking you through our class today. And first, I'll introduce you to Ryan. Ryan is a film artist and educator. He has worked with Indie for years, and we sort of lovingly refer to him as our mascot because he kind of feels like part of the crew. And he is a truly amazing artist and creator. And we love Ryan so much, and I know that you guys are going to as well.
Next, I love you too.
Next, I'll introduce you to Josh Moates. Josh is one of our founders, and one thing you have to know about Josh is he's the type of guy that if he loves something, he's going to make everybody around him love it too. So back in 2011, when Josh fell in love with film photography, his niche interest turned into Indie Film Lab. It turned into us, all of us coming together. So he ended up founding the lab with his business partner, Kim Box, and here we all are together. So thank you so much to Ryan and Josh for teaching us today. And just want to remind everybody, if you will, as we move forward, if you'll stay muted, but if you've got questions, please put it in the chat. So the chat is down at the bottom, the little talk box. You can click that. It should pull up the chat for you. If you got questions there, I'll be reading them throughout the class. And then we'll have a question and answer section at the end as well, and I'll read those for you there too. So thank you again so much for joining us, and we can't wait to learn with you guys.
Josh, you're muted. Josh, you're muted. You got to click the little unmute button on your Zoom window. No, you're still muted.
Gosh, of course.
There we go. We got you. We got you. We got you.
Of course, something like that happens. It's just how it is. Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate it. I'll edit that out later. No. Thanks, Jackie. So Jackie's our lab manager. She runs everything at Indie Film Lab. I mean, everything. She manages everybody's schedule and just pretty much runs the entire lab, because if I did it, it would be horrible. So she is our rock star here. So thank you, Jackie. She's going to be checking on all those questions that you guys type in. So let's get started right away, if I can get this thing to work. Of course, it's going to work perfectly until we do it live. All right, why film, Ryan? This is your slide. Go ahead, man.
This is my slide. Why film? There's so many ways to answer that, and there's so many angles to take. I guess the classic answers are like the look of film. And I mean, the look of film is something I'm absolutely in love with. But if I was being completely honest, why film for me is how it affects how I shoot. When I started shooting, I really wanted to feel something. I was really shy. I had a really hard time expressing myself. And there was this certain range of emotions and experiences I wanted to have while photographing that I was having a tough time having in my normal life. And like a lot of people, I think I started with digital, you know, I just grabbed a Canon 10D and a kit lens, and I had all this stuff going on in me, and I wanted to communicate it with a photo. And I finally got brave enough to ask some people to work with me. And then, you know, early on in that experience, I'm trying to feel something, I'm trying to make something beautiful, and I'm nervous, and I click a photo. And what do? I look at the back of the screen and go, oh crap, that's not very good. That's not what I wanted to do. This is embarrassing. And you know, and then they're like, well, let me see. And then I'm immediately in the like, no, I don't want you to see it. It's not what I meant to do yet. And I was, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 shoots in, and I was just confiding in a friend. I said, like, the worst part of this experience is wanting it to be something, wanting to work on something, and clicking a photo and seeing the result immediately and knowing that's not it, and that derailing the entire experience. And I was like, I got to get a camera without a screen. And they were like a film camera? And I was like, yeah, fine, great. You know, it was like, that was all it took me to switch, was like, I need to make this experience more about the experience and less about the photo, in a way. And I've really carried that with me even to my work right now, that I want my work to be about the time I spent with the person and how we felt about it. And the photos are more of souvenirs, more of something we got to take away from that, not the thing we were both concentrating on doing. And, you know, along the way, I fell in love with everything: the old cameras, the look of film, the feeling of making something analog, the fact you get a negative back you can hold. I mean, I'm in love with the entire spectrum. But if I had to boil down that why film question, it would be, I want to focus more on what I'm doing in the moment and less on the photos I'm making. I saw someone share a quote the other day, and it's a little Pinteresty, but it said something like, with digital, I remember the photo, and with film, I remember taking the photo. And I kind of thought, like, yeah, that's kind of how it is for me. So that's why film for me.
Huh. That's awesome, man. I never heard that. For me, it's a little different. You know, I got into film when I was in high school because I had to take photos of people in art class to paint them, and the paintings sucked and the photos were pretty cool. And for me, it was a tool to use in art class to, you know, I'd take it to like the grocery store and get the prints, and I would hang the prints up and paint them. And so for me, it was a tool just to capture somebody's face that I can paint. And then during that, I was like, this process is way cooler and more fun and exciting than the painting part. The painting sucked. It took forever, and it wasn't even close to the photo. And it wasn't fun. It was like, I mean, it was all right, but the actual taking I would carry my camera everywhere, and I would take pictures of folks and paint them. And that was the cool part for me. And so I was like, oh, there's something, you know, there's something to this. And then when I started shooting weddings, it was, I guess weddings would be like 2004. The best camera that I could get my hand on digitally was like a 10D. And so I would shoot weddings with the 10D and the 20D and the 30D. And then I just realized, like, something's missing. I'm not sure what. I would, you know, look at the photos and I'm just like, it's missing something. And so I was moving one time and I found a backpack full of my negatives from college and high school. And in the negatives, there were prints that I had made, like 8x10s or whatever, in the folder. And I was like, whoa, this is what I'm missing in my work, is this film look, like this look. So for me, it's like, honestly, it's about the look. I mean, you know, the process is so much fun too. And, but for me, it's almost like 100% about the look. The experience is fun, like having a camera that you're not kind of glued to the screen on, and not like, you know, you're not constantly looking at the back of your camera. Did I do a good job? Did I do a good job? It's like, once you know lighting, you're like, I know this is going to be good, and it's going to be even better on film. Because for me, those 10Ds or whatever, and digitals came a long way since then, for sure. no doubt. But those cameras were so limiting, and the quality was just not there. They were crop chip, and they were just not for me. I mean, it just wasn't exactly what I was hoping to get. And then when I got medium format camera and the RZ, I was like blown away. So for me, it's all about the look and the feel of the images. And yeah, so I hope that wasn't too long for. Sorry. All right, so film type. So for some of you guys, and it's hard, I'm not looking at you. I don't see a screen of people. I see just the slideshow. So I want to kind of see heads nod and stuff like that. So I don't get that kind of feedback. So I don't really know what's going on. I'm just going to read this slide. But
well, quick question before you move on to the film types. Reese Ferguson shouted out in the chat and said, yeah, why does even a bad film photo look better than a good digital photo?
Oh my gosh, that's a shirt. Can we print that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to rag on digital because a lot of my favorite photographers shoot almost exclusively digital. But for me, even the film photos I would consider misses. I mean, again, it's a little cliche and Pinteresty, but all my film photos feel like memories. Even the mistakes kind of have this feel of like being there, and my bad digital photos just feel awful. So, I mean, I'm not exactly a non-biased source, but yeah,
that's true.
I tend to agree.
That's a really good point. So film type. So we have, for some of you guys who are new, there's medium format, which or sorry, 35 millimeter, which is not, I've never heard it called small format. I don't know why I wrote that. It is the smallest. Well, there's other smaller ones, but 35 is the most common, smaller of the formats. And then you bump up to medium format, which, so in the next slide is going to explain this a little bit more, but just know that in medium format, there are tons of different cameras that will fit that format. And you go up to large format, which is sheet film, which is one shot at a time. We're going to go over this more. I just get familiar with 35 millimeter is a smaller format. Medium format is the next size up. It's 120 film, which you see over here on the right. Comes in a roll, also known as roll film. And there's many different types of cameras that can shoot different pretty much sizes on this roll of film. And then you have large, which is sheet. I already said all that. Is there something you want to say on this one, Ryan, before we go on to the next one?
I'll just talk on the next one.
Okay. Sometimes when I click next, it doesn't do next. So I don't know why that is. Okay.
Yeah. So here we have pretty close to, I guess it would change depending on the monitor you're on. On my monitor, it looks almost about what they actually are. But this just kind of helps lay out the size of the information you're capturing. As many of you guys probably know, a 35 millimeter negative is the same size as a full frame sensor in a digital camera. That's what they based full frame off of, is 35 millimeters. It's 24 by 36 millimeters in dimension. And something really cool about the medium format film is they all come in that roll of film, but there's all these different cameras that give you a different amount of information, but all on that same roll of film. So a lot of people, like the wedding shooters, like to use a 645 because the cameras still kind of work a lot like the SLRs that you're used to. The negative's much bigger than 35 millimeter, but you're still getting 16 shots on a roll. So it's still like quite a few shots before you would have to reload. The 6x6, again, even bigger. The cameras a lot of people are familiar that shoot that are like Hasselblad and Rolleiflex. And 6.7, which is my favorite of the medium format. Cameras like the Pentax 6.7 and the Mamiya 7.2 that I own are just some of my favorite formats. And what's so cool about medium format is you jump up in the size and quality, but you can also kind of find the medium format that's right for you. I feel like I've bought and sold almost every film camera that exists. And for me, not really shooting events or shooting anything like that, I found that the medium format for me was 6x7. It's 10 shots a roll. It really slows you down. The optics just look insane on them. And I found that I'm terrible at squares, that I just really struggle to make interesting compositions in a square, and that 645 really wasn't for me. Whereas when we ask Josh, he'll probably tell you he's done a bunch of 645 in the past. Because I love the look of 35 millimeter, and I don't mind carrying around this camera and shooting it when I need lots of shots per roll. But then when I love something and I want to jump up to medium format, I don't want to jump up just a little bit. I want to jump to something huge. So for me, I really settled into 35 millimeter and 6.7. And then when you get into sheet film, like large format, you can see the negatives just gigantic compared. And something I guess a little interesting to point out is that these 645, 6.6, and 6.7 are referring to centimeters. Oh my gosh, I just forgot what it is. It must be centimeters.
It's gotta be.
But the 4x5 is referring to inches. So a lot of the film types are just kind of named randomly, but it's fun to learn what they are. And I just got a 4x5 camera that I can handhold and shoot. It's called a Crown Graphic. So yeah, I'm currently using 35, 6.7, and 4x5.
Yeah, 645 in the wedding world is ideal because you get 16 shots. And when 220 was around, it's crazy to get that many shots on a roll of medium format, but which is double 120. 220 they don't make anymore, so I don't even know I'm talking about it. But it was such a great thing to have when you're on a wedding day and you get that many shots, you get double. So it was just amazing to have. And I shot a Hasselblad H1 for a while, and I love that camera, and it was so sharp, and I got so many shots per roll. But when I bought, actually my first medium format camera was a RZ67, which is 6x7. And I remember I went from 35 millimeter in high school.
I'm going to grab some cameras. I'll be right back.
All right. I went from 35 millimeter to 6.7, which is it jumps 2 whole sizes. So I went from this little guy to this monster, and it doesn't look like a monster, but it's a big negative, and you get a lot of information, a lot of tonality, a lot of range. It's insane. And the quality was literally, like you said, it's insane. And I remember getting the film back from the first time, and this was like 05, and it was like, whoa, it's a huge difference. But 35 can surprise you. For me, like 6.7 is if I was shooting something like he was saying, everything he said is exactly how I feel. When I'm walking around just getting some street shots, 35 is the way to go. It's not intimidating. It's easy to carry around, but it's hard to carry around a RZ67, although they make 6.7s that are smaller. Are you holding, I can't see you, so are you holding up your 6.7s?
We just had a couple questions, and one of them was about cameras. That's probably what Jackie just joined back in to say. That's why I went to grab some.
Oh,
yes, there was a question about what types of cameras will shoot 6.7, and another question, if you had to pick one format to make the most money, which one would it be? Medium format for the wow factor, or 35 millimeter for the number of frames you can get per roll?
I'll jump into the cameras one real quick. It's almost impossible to give a complete list because there's so many brands back in the day that made cameras to fit these negative sizes. But I just grabbed my 2 favorite 6.7s to show you. Probably my all-time favorite camera and lens, if I had to pick, would probably be this Pentax 6.7 II with this 75 millimeter 2.8. So, I mean, it's big, but it works, kind of just like an SLR that you're used to, folks in normal. So this is one of my go-to 6.7s. And then my other go-to 6.7 is this Mamiya 7 II. And this is a rangefinder camera, which we're going to talk about a little bit more later, but meaning you're not looking straight through the lens. So it's much smaller and lighter. So this is like an amazing travel 6.7 camera. And maybe Josh can say more, but as far as what format to make the most money, I think that completely depends on who you are. If you're shooting for art prints that you want to print large, something medium format, 6.7. If you're trying to keep your costs down, but you still want something that looks nice, 35. But I mean, that's so hard to answer without knowing who you are and what your business is.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So this kind of shows your hold on, I think it's an echo because I can finally see you guys, but it's kind of echoing. Sorry. Hold on, still doing it. Come on, stop the audio. I don't want to hear myself talk. How do I do that, Jackie? Anyway,
Just
you guys, it helps to see. Anyway, so at the top, can you still hear that echo? Hello?
yeah, I can't. Yeah, I can get rid of it.
That's annoying. Gosh, I want to see you guys.
You're going through your phone or are you going through your computer?
Phone. It's all good. Here we go. 35 millimeter. Yeah, 36 shots per roll. It just shows you a layout of how the film negative is laid on the roll. So you can kind of see how that is. And then 645, you can see that they went vertical here to kind of make more room for more frames. And then 6.6 and 6.7. There's actually a 6.9 and a 6.12. There's a bunch of different, but these are the most common. The 6.9 is kind of cool because it's a little bit longer, and then the panoramics are really cool. You get like 4 or 5 shots per roll.
Yeah, there's even like a 6.17.
Yeah, that's right, that Fuji one, and it's huge. So this is kind of how it's laid out, so you get an idea of how it's just a film strip. You can do anything you want to with it. It just depends on the camera manufacturer and who, what you want to use it for. The 6.6 is kind of an older format, but you're right, man. Like when I shot square, it's like I don't even know where to start. It's like the most awkward for me because it doesn't really, you can't really, if you shoot a portrait, it doesn't really fit right. Is that kind of how you feel? Like I'm just like, it doesn't fit right. Something's not right.
Yeah.
But it is pretty cool, and there's some cool cameras. So let's go to the next one. So 35 millimeter. You want to talk a little bit about 35?
Yeah.
This is your photo.
I mean, I absolutely love 35 millimeter. Something I kind of picked up from one of my friends, Jan Schultz, who's one of my favorite photographers and best friends, of kind of combining the two systems, is he uses his 35 millimeter camera, and I do now, to kind of hunt for the images, to just be trying stuff, to working around, shooting. You got a lot of shots per roll. And then when he finds something that he loves, he's like, oh, hold that. And then pulls out the big camera and just does 1 or 2 frames on that, which is such an amazing way to maximize those frames per roll. That's kind of more related to the last slide, the rolls we were just talking about. But yeah, I love 35 millimeter. And I think maybe something that scares people off about it, and why I chose this image in particular, is people are like, oh, 35 millimeter is so grainy. And if you even get up to like Portrait 800, which this image is shot on, like it'll be so grainy. And it is. And I've printed this image huge. And when you get up close to it, it has all this grain, but I don't care. I love it. I think it's so beautiful. I have tons of 35 millimeter cameras. This one was shot on a Leica M7 on the Oregon coast on Portrait 800. And I guess my thing to say about 35 millimeter film is, like, especially if you're used to digital, don't be afraid of the grain. Yeah, it looks different, but you're going to fall in love with that different look.
Yeah. And about the printing, like we are talking about earlier, this exact image we printed so large for our Indie Printco booth. And when you're normal viewing distance away, it looks amazing. It looks incredible. Yeah. When you're 2 inches away from it, you're going to see grain and some noise and things like that. But when you're a normal viewing distance away, which is like 4 to 5 feet, they all just kind of come together and it looks amazing and it's beautiful. And so, yeah, 35 does have more grain, but for any printing situation, like 16 by 20, like 5 by 7s, it looks incredible. It looks so good. So I would not be scared of that for sure. For me, 35 is a great walk around camera, like street shooting kind of stuff. I've shot weddings with it. I've shot just things around the house with my kids. The cameras are so small and so light. It's incredible. So I really do like 35, and I love 35 black and white, even more than color for me. But I used to really have a love-hate relationship with 35 color because it's either going to be really great or really not great for me. But in this past year, I sold all my medium format cameras because I'm trying to save up to get like another Pentax 672. And I've shot a lot of 35 color, and I really, really dig it. I shot a wedding a couple weeks ago, and I was like, why am I not shooting more 35 color? Because it looks really great. So 645 we talked about. It's the next step up. It's the entry level into medium format. There's a lot of cool cameras that feel similar to your SLR that you've already, or DSLR that you're already shooting. And there's a lot of models. There's tons of camera manufacturers out there, which we'll get into in a little bit. But when you step up to that medium format, there is a pretty big, even to the 645 is a big jump. It looks incredible. And which 645 did you shoot, Ryan? Did you?
I had a Contax 645 forever. Just
that's right.
When I got started, people were like, "This is the film camera you get," and back then they were. I got my Contax kit for $1,200.
Me too. I bought 2 of them. I'm like, why didn't I buy all of them?
Yeah, and I've had a Pentax 645 and a Mamiya 645 along the way, but like I said, I found that I wasn't doing event coverage or anything, so it just wasn't for me.
Right.
So we've had a couple of questions about medium
Jackie,
format
can I
bodies.
say something real
Sure.
quick?
Sure.
I want to, if the questions aren't like really closely related to what we're doing, I'd love to save them towards the end because I can see the chat and a lot of them are stuff we're going to cover.
Okay. Yeah. So while we're here on medium format and you guys were sort of talking about bodies, we have had a couple of questions about if there is more of a starter camera versus a forever camera. So we're still talking about film right here, but when we get to bodies, if you guys will cover that. And also while we talk about film, if y'all will ask or give us a little bit of information about how you store your film once we get to that place as well.
I can just say that right now. I keep the film I'm not using in the next few days in a refrigerator, and I keep film that's more sensitive to degrading, like Cinestill or something like that, in a freezer. And I just give it enough time to warm up before I shoot it. So I store my medium-term film in a fridge and my long-term film in a freezer. And
what about after it's shot and you get your film back from the lab?
Like my negatives? We'll cover that too. I use a service called the Film Hound that Indy provides. And a guy named John cuts and sleeves my negatives into the archival sheets, and then they go into binders. Yeah, and here's 2 more of my images. Maybe like 2 of the 8 images in a square format that I think have a nice composition. We just wanted to show these. Both of these are shot on a Rolleiflex 2.8F planar, which is kind of like the Rolls Royce of 6.6 cameras, unless you're into Hasselblad. But we're going to talk about camera types more. But I mean, I guess something to bring up at any time, and maybe now, is that for me, a really good way of explaining it is 35 millimeter film. When I look at it, looks a lot like how my eyes see things. The depth of field, the perspective, the rendering feels very like humanly familiar. But and 645 still kind of does, which is why I love jumping up to 6.6 and 6.7, because you're looking at this and I can already tell like, whoa, that looks different than how my eyes see it. It's like when you see an IMAX movie that was actually shot in medium format. Normally movies have that like, oh yeah, this is what it looks like to look at stuff. But then you jump up to that IMAX thing and it's like, whoa. And you can get that experience from a still camera just by, to me, shooting like a 6.6 or 6.7 negative.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's like even just looking through the viewfinder without even shooting the film, it's like, whoa, it's better than my eyes can see it. And it's so sharp. Like this one on the left, I shot in studio in a room behind me with strobes and the GF 670. And it is one of the sharpest, like it's insane razor sharp. It's crazy. And I know sharpness is not everything, but for this shot, being it so sharp, I can literally see hairs all over his face when you zoom in, and it's pretty insane. And look at yours. I mean, like you're maybe if you're like half blind like me, if you get really close to somebody, it looks like that. But that's incredible.
That's another thing I love about 6.7 is that the larger format you shoot on, basically, I mean, to really dumb it down, like the more you can blur the background, even on a wider lens, which is why one of my favorite combinations ever, and I'm guessing this shot we're looking at was shot on this. I use this 75 millimeter lens, and we'll talk about this later, but it's the equivalent of a 35 millimeter lens. And normally on wide lenses, you can't really drop the background from your subject, especially when they're a ways away from you. But on 6/7, you can get that look, and it just looks so surreal, which is just one of the things I'm in love with about 6/7.
So dreamy, really. And her eyes are like probably sharp as crap, and then everything else is just kind of. I mean, the bokeh in the back, the trees, like just these limbs look so cool.
Yeah.
To nerd out a little bit. So we talked about film types as far as like roll film and 35 and all that. Now we're going to talk about what like color film and black and white film and E6 and all that. So C41 is just another name for color negative film. It's your standard color film that you can get in a drugstore. Portrait, all the portrait lines are C41, Ektar C41. C41 is the chemistry type that we use. So don't let that freak you out. And so what's the differences between color negative and color positive? C41 is a very large dynamic range, meaning you can shoot it in pretty much any type of, and I think that's, yeah, I mean, that's why I think the consumer films are C41 is because it's kind of hard to mess up. It's very forgiving, and there's so many different speeds and looks that you can go for. And it's just a common film type that is beautiful. Anything you want to say about C41?
Yeah, I guess if we're doing like an intro class and we want to talk to maybe some people that don't know anything about film, one of the main key differences between digital is on when you're shooting digital, your number one worry is I'm going to blow my highlights. On film, it's the exact opposite. You don't want to lose your shadow detail. And one of the things people love about C41 film is you can overexpose it, and the sky, if you're shooting outside, just stays. Because I mean, you can overexpose C41 film by like 7 or 8 stops before you start to lose all your highlight detail that can't be recovered in scanning.
Right.
So it lends itself to shooting like backlit, and I mean, it lends itself to shooting everything, but I guess that's a key difference to point out, is that you're going to hold your highlight detail like crazy instead of your shadow detail.
Yeah. And in the metering section, we can kind of show you a little bit more of example. We have a section based on that whole metering that we're going to talk about all that. But yeah, with digital, you got to worry about blowing the highlights. And with film, you have to worry about leaving your shadows without any light hitting it. So you have to kind of really meter for the shadows. That's where that whole term kind of comes from. Then we have black and white film, which to me, I just absolutely love black and white film. You know, with digital, you can add grain to it, take out the color, and you can kind of get it kind of close. But for me, I cannot make it look like true black and white film. There's just a glow to it, and especially like Tri-X and Ilford HP5 has a glow to it that you just can't kind of get with digital. Has a classic look, tons of stuff. Like Ilford has so many different black and white. They only make black and white films. We'll talk about them in a minute, but there's so many different varieties of black and white film. Darkroom printing is something that you can do in your house, and it's pretty much, you can develop it in your bathroom if you absolutely have to. Anything you want to say about black and white?
Yeah, I think a question I get often is, like, if you're already shooting film, why not just shoot color film and desaturate it? Like, why even bother with black and white film and not give yourself the option? And for me, Josh kind of covered it, but I cannot recreate the look of what grain on black and white film looks like. And even when I desaturate C41 images and try to add some grain or whatever, I'm like, wow, this is not it. Yeah. This does not capture. I mean, black and white film just feels like the classic, like history. You can still get that like Tri-X look that makes you think like, oh my gosh, was this image shot 80 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. I brought these comedians, they were playing in town, and I said, dude, please come. I just messaged them on Instagram. I said, please come to my studio. Let me shoot you guys. And I shot them all in black and white. And the girl comedian, which is this guy, Dusty Slay, who is his wife now, she wrote on her Instagram, she posted the photo and said, oh, I'm so glad I got my picture made today. She's like, basically saying, I don't know what year this was taken. It was taken like a few days ago. She's like, it looks like I was shot in like Time Life magazine. She was just like so pumped about it. She was like, she didn't quite understand why it looked that way. And I had to explain, it was like, well, this huge camera I have makes it look that way. It just has this really cool look to it. And she just made a joke about how she was so glad she got her photo taken by Time Life magazine, which is so true because, man, you can get some really cool stuff with that. So here's some companies that make film. Kodak, obviously, Fujifilm, Ilford. kind of. Ilford, Cinestill, which is a really cool company, friends of ours, who they kind of take movie film, the same film that they shoot like movies with, and they make it available. They do some cool stuff to it to make it available for you to shoot in your 35 millimeter camera and 120 camera, and develop it here with us. And it's really cool. It's a really unique look. And there's a slide coming up with a cool example Ryan shot. And then there's some more consumer grade stuff like Lomography. They make a ton of different films, and they're all kind of very just fun. Yeah, like purple and yellow and funky colors and like crazy outcomes and all that. And it's just experimental style stuff. And it's
I mean, they make normal stuff too. Like I've shot their 800, I've shot their 200. But yeah,
it's just not a pro film. I would say it's like we see it here all the time, and it's real thin. It's just more of a kind of a fun kind of film. But you can get some really cool stuff out of it for sure. Let's see. So here's some examples.
Jackie, you jumping in?
Yeah. So as you guys go through the film stocks here, if you could talk just a little bit about, obviously you're going to talk about the difference in the stocks, but also if there are any sort of go-to best all-around stocks that you would recommend for both shooting portraits as well as landscapes. So color film, black and white film, is there something that's just always in your bag that is reliable, predictable, like your go-to films?
Go ahead.
Man, again, another question that there's just so many ways to answer. If I was going to tell someone that was like, I just want to start with one film and I want to get comfortable with it, it's funny that my answer is probably the color film I shoot the least, because I would probably say Portra 400, because you can use it inside, you can use it outside. It's very versatile. You can even underexpose it and it still looks okay. You can push it and it still looks okay. So it's very, very versatile and very nice. But if I was answering the question for myself, I shoot in a lot of low light stuff, and the color palette of Portra 800, it makes it by far my favorite color film, which is a tad painful because it's not exactly the cheapest film. But it has the way it renders like greens and blues and skin tones. Funny, we have this slide up. This image in the middle that I shot on Warped Tour is outside in bright light on my Pentax 672 again. And this is on Kodak Portra 800 in the middle of the day. So while I maybe wouldn't suggest that one for people to learn on just for price and maybe more grain and all that, it's my go-to. I mean, if there is a color palette that I would say that is my work, it's Portra 800. And for black and white, I've historically shot tons of Tri-X, far more than any other film, just because it has that classic black and white look. But I'm branching into T-Max a little bit lately.
Yeah, the one on the left is Portra 160. And I shot that film because I was shooting the Hasselblad H1, which basically the top shutter speed on that was 800. So I was shooting in bright daylight and I needed a slower film. And I shot this at 80 ISO with a 100 2.2 lens. So I wanted the 2.2 depth of field. And so I had to shoot 160 like all the time. And I shot so much of that film. But it has a little different vibe to it. It has something in the magentas and the greens that are completely different than the other stocks. But 400 for real is like Ryan said, is I would say the best, safest starting point. You can shoot it anywhere. It's so versatile. And again, 800 is beautiful. I just shot a session on 800 and it's gorgeous. And the colors are pretty amazing. And, don't be scared of the 800 grain, because when they redid their film stocks in 2010, they started using the movie film technology, the Vision 3, and it's like not as grainy as the old 800. So 800 is pretty amazing film, and Tri-X, of course, is a classic.
I guess it's worth pointing out that maybe for someone who doesn't know anything about film, that as you shoot the larger and larger negative sizes of the exact same film, you will see less and less grain. Like
Right.
we showed that image of mine on the Oregon coast. Maybe you can go back one slide.
Okay.
We showed that image of mine on the Oregon coast on portrait 135 millimeter, and it is quite grainy. But on the last slide where it was the photo of Jeffree Star on Warped Tour, that is also on portrait 800, but on the 6.7 negative, even zoomed in, there's not very much grain at all on portrait 800 in 6.7 film.
Right. It won't let me go back. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No,
Right.
That's a good life lesson. No going back. Only
No
forward.
going back. Only forward.
This will be a quick slide. RIP Fujifilm. You're killing off some beautiful stocks, and we hate you for it. The two on the left are 400H, which was a staple for a lot of wedding and a lot of just shooters. It has this dreamy palette to it. It looked beautiful overexposed. It looked horrible underexposed, but it just had this glow to it that people were in love with it. And like with anything that people really, really love, someone had to kill it.
Right.
And the one on the right is on Acros. It's actually on Acros 1, which they discontinued, but they have since re-released Acros 2 Judgment Day. I was really happy with myself for that joke for some reason. But it's available in 35 and 120 again. And Fuji used to make pack film, which they killed, which wounded me more than any photographic event ever.
The Acros is gorgeous, and the new one that came out with is really cool. And I think Ilford actually makes it for them.
Yeah,
But
I think they do too.
that black and white is something else. It is the Acros is pretty amazing. All right, let's talk about
Get that off the screen. Get it off.
All right, we're out of here. Ilford. So Ilford's really cool. They only make black and white film, and they make a lot of it, and they make tons of different varieties of it. I mean, everything. It's pretty cool. I've shot, I think, most of it. The HP5 was one. It's a 400 speed film, and it stands out to me the most. It just has a glow to it that even when you shoot side by side with other black and white films, it just has a little bit of something special about it.
Yeah, I mean, Ilford makes so much. They've got a 50, they've got a 100, they've got a 125, they've got two 400s, they've got, I probably even missed a 100. They have Delta and the other, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ilford focuses on black and white film. They're committed to making it for a long time, and they do a phenomenal job with it.
Yeah, that's all I mean, they have a 3200 that's amazing. I'm like, it's just a great, and they support a lot of cool things that I like, skateboarding and stuff like that. Here's a Cinestill. This is your shot on Cinestill. Tell us why it's so blue, Ryan.
Yeah, man, Cinestill, I'm just in love with it for so many reasons. One, it was started by two of my really good friends, Brandon and Brian. And I've been shooting Cinestill since they were rolling it in the back room of their studio, since when they were buying the film and getting the back layer off to make it work in still cameras and rolling it themselves into canisters and handing it to their friends. So, I mean, I've been shooting Cinestill almost since day one. And for those that don't know what makes Cinestill special is it's a tungsten balanced film. And there are not many tungsten balanced films out there. Almost all color films are balanced to look right in daylight, but Cinestill is balanced to look right under tungsten light or fluorescent light or lamps or, basically anything other than daylight. Cinestill looks amazing. And I shoot Cinestill in daylight too. And my friend Shannon that uses your lab shoots Cinestill in daylight, and she just gets some amazing looks out of it. But yeah, since it's tungsten balanced, if you shot Cinestill just in daylight, it would theoretically look very blue. And you can correct that with a filter, or they can actually correct that scanning it pretty decently, or you can just get images that have a blue tone to them like Shannon does, and they look incredible.
Yeah,
But
go ahead.
This is my friend Stephanie in Las Vegas. There's just neon everywhere, obviously, and we're next to a storefront, next to a casino. And this is like neon and light bulbs and just every kind of artificial light hitting her. And I shot this on a Nikon with a 51.2 lens on the Cinestill film. But it's worth pointing out, Cinestill also makes a black and white film, and they also make a daylight balanced film. So the first time Josh and I did this, they only made a tungsten film, but now they've got a black and white film and a daylight balance film.
Yeah, I love the swirly whirly bokehs. That's what I call it. So if you're on your digital camera and you look at your color options, you have daylight and you have all the different like shade, and you have tungsten and fluorescent. You have all the different. Well, in film, you only have a couple options. You have daylight, you have tungsten. I think that's about it. And so those color temperatures are, so the tungsten was like for film, like when they're making movies, they have these hot lights that are really orange, like your house lights at home, right? So if you shoot cinestill at your house with the tungsten or the your normal lights that you would have overhead, I shot like my son in front of a computer at night, and it was just like the light from light bulbs, and it was like perfect color. And so that's so they can use certain lights when they're making movies, and also when you're shooting a wedding, it's like this. It's like the color orange is brighter than the color blue, and that will come in effect when you're shooting tungsten balanced film in a dim lit room. So if you're shooting portrait in a dim like tungsten balanced room, or like I guess that's hot light, and they're called hot light, just regular lights, the orangey lights that you get from a tent or whatever, you're gonna have to overexpose that a little bit more than you would if you're shooting tungsten balanced film. So it actually adds like the ability to shoot in lower light, if that makes sense. Sorry.
Yes, Cinestill's amazing at that, and you can push Cinestill. I've done it frequently. So if you're looking for color film in really low light, Cinestill 800T is an amazing example.
Yeah, it's pretty great. Or you're gonna get some crazy cool stuff from it. All right, let's talk about camera types. So one question I get all the time is, what camera should I start with? And so that's a tricky question, because I love medium format so much, and it's such a big jump from digital. But to keep it safe and to keep it like, easy, one of the easiest things you can do, honestly, if you're a Canon shooter or Nikon shooter, go buy their latest and greatest film camera. They quit making these. The EOS 1V, I think this is like a $500 camera. They make an EOS 1N that you can get for like $100 and something. I've owned both of them. They're both great. This is just more of this is like the newest, the latest and greatest. And Nikon's like FM6, I think maybe. Yeah, is their latest one or the last one?
It's not FM, it's just F. But yeah.
Oh, F6. Yeah,
F4,
my bad.
F5, F6. I have a Nikon F4, and I could throw all the latest Nikon digital lenses on this bad boy. And the layout's so similar.
So similar, yeah.
What you're used to holding. So that's a great way to start.
Yeah, and this camera right here, you can put all your lenses on that you already have for your 5D or whatever, and just start shooting. And if you didn't want to go that route, you could just get an AE1. I think these are like $150 now. And it's just a little more mechanical. There's no autofocus or anything like that compared to this. Just a little more mechanical kind of deal. You got to rewind the film and load it differently and all that, but still, it's a great way to start, and you're going to get some cool stuff. So I've never owned one of these. I've shot one of these. I know Thomas has one of these. I've shot them. I just never owned one. So I don't think it's for me, but it's a really cool. You've owned these, right?
Well, yeah, I've owned quite a few. I still have one. I have a cheap one called a Yashica 124G. That's really good. Twin lens reflex. The big thing to know about this camera is it has two lenses, and you're looking through one to see what you're composing and focusing, and you're looking through the other while you're not looking through it. And the other one is the one that takes the picture. And something that these offer is, since there's no mirror bouncing up and down in these, you can shoot these at slower shutter speeds, because part of what gives you shake or blur in your images is the mirror in your camera slapping up and down. Like on that Pentax 6.7, it can shake your image just taking the picture. So these kind of get around that by a different viewing lens and a different taking lens. The TLR cameras, unless I'm mistaken, all shoot square, all shoot 6x6 film. And so while I've owned a lot of them, I don't shoot it very often.
They're pretty cool looking on your shelf. They're sharp though. The Rolleiflex are really sharp. The Mamiya too. Yeah. They're both sharp. Rangefinder. I really love a rangefinder. When I first got a rangefinder, it was the Canon, what is it? What was that one? That really cheap one? Canon makes one with the fixed lens on it. I got it for like $30 on KEH. And it was so fun to learn because you're not looking through the lens. You're looking through this little viewfinder right here. And when you focus, you're kind of seeing two images at once. You're seeing the whole scene. And then you see the viewfinder over it and you have to line up the image to focus it. It sounds crazy, but once you get used to it, it's really kind of fun to shoot. And they're so small and lightweight, and they're really quiet. Well, my Leica's kind of loud, but this is a Leica camera, which are very expensive, and they've gone up in price.
As is this.
Yeah, and they're super expensive, but they are very nice. Like the camera I have an M6. I paid like $1,200 for it. And now they're like $2,400. And this camera you can have forever. It's a German made camera. I'm literally I'm going to keep this camera forever. And that's how well they're built. They're amazing. And they're just like, they're popular with street shooting. And we can talk about that I guess later. Do you have, I know you love your Leica.
I love shooting rangefinders. Like the Leica I was just showing is a rangefinder, as is this Mamiya 7. And the main things to know about a rangefinder and why people love them is you're not looking through the lens of the camera. On maybe a lot of the cameras you're used to shooting, you're looking into a prism, down to a mirror, and out the lens of the camera, seeing what you're actually shooting. On a rangefinder, you're looking through a hole in the side of the camera and not through the lens. And that has some advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantages, you have to get used to the focusing system because you're not looking at your actual focus, you're lining up images to make sure it's in focus. But there's several advantages. One, the cameras can be much smaller because there's no prism and mirror. The lens is just sitting almost right on the film plane. Another advantage that gives that we sort of covered is there's no mirror bouncing up and down to shake your camera. So you can shoot your rangefinders at much slower shutter speeds than you can in SLR. And for me, who's always shooting in low light, always running out of light, knowing I can make an image at a 15th or sometimes an 1/8 of a second is amazing. I love that about it because with 800 speed film at 1.4 at an 1/8 of a second, I mean, that's almost the dark. And I shoot like that all the time. And the other thing is, since you're just looking through a hole in the camera and it just gives you some lines of showing what your actual image is, you can actually see outside of the picture you're taking. Meaning if you're working on your composition or you're doing documentary type stuff, you can see what's happening around your image while your eye is to the camera. And also they're designed for right eye shooters. So if you're left eye dominant, it kind of sucks for you. But I mean, you can kind of shoot like this too. You can see around the image in the camera, and it's real easy to keep your eye also engaged. So Leica's obviously became extremely famous for documentary and photojournalism work.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about a rangefinder is when I have it, people go, "Ooh, that's cool." People come up to me like, "Oh, that's a real nice camera." I go, "Thanks. I'm a real photographer."
Great.
That's a joke. Anyway, lens conversion chart. So this is it gives you an idea.
I love it when Jackie appears. It's almost like we're in trouble or something.
Yeah, she's like, guys.
Like there's just like a dark square, and then Jackie comes and she's like, "Hey."
It's me. I have a question. Okay, so before we move on from camera body types, what's a good way if somebody is trying to choose a camera? Is there any kind of metric that they can use to decide if it's the right camera for them? Is there another way other than just buy cameras and try them and then hope you can sell them? Is there a way that somebody can kind of know this is the right camera for travel, or this is the right camera for shooting portraits? Or is it really all just trial and error?
I mean, it's not all just trial and error. And I got to say, there are some amazingly helpful groups on the internet. Like I'm in Facebook groups that are just buy and sell film camera groups that are amazingly responsive to questions like that, where you can just throw out, "Hey, I'm looking to travel with something and I want it to be medium format and I want it to have a meter in it, but I want it to have a decently fast lens." And film people just love their gear. They love talking about it. So, but I mean, if you wanted to get like really basic, like rangefinders can struggle with portraits a little bit until you get really familiar with them, because if you're shooting wide open and close, you're just lining up a guide of focus. You know, if you're have almost nothing in focus and you like shooting really close and portraits, you probably want an SLR so that you're seeing the actual focus in your camera. But if you're saying, I want something smaller with amazing lenses that, you know, fits in a bag better, rangefinders are incredible for that. But I mean, there's a lot of just personal research you have to do. But the amazing thing is that groups of film photographers love answering that kind of question.
Yeah, and you'll surprise yourself too what you like, and like if you start trying different cameras. When I first got the rangefinder, I was like, I don't like, for like a couple days or whatever, I was like, I don't know about this. This is not really. And now it's like, I love it, absolutely love it. So it takes
that's a great point. If
Yeah.
you're going to jump into the rangefinder world, I mean, give yourself 2 or 3 months to feel really comfortable with it, because so much, you know, the viewing system's different, the focusing system's different, it's just a lot to adjust to. But I knew I wanted to love it eventually, so I just got one and plowed ahead, and now I absolutely love shooting them.
Yeah, I guess the best way to start out, like we were saying, is like if you're already used to an SLR type camera, start with that, get comfortable with the film, and then find like all these ones that we were talking about. There's like cheaper versions of them. Like you don't have to go buy a Leica. You can go buy I forgot the G something 3, the Canon, Canonet, sorry, the Canonet, GL3 or whatever it is. It's like $100 or maybe cheap. I think I got mine for 30, but that was before like people jumped on the bandwagon. But I'm not saying $100 is cheap, but for a camera, it's pretty inexpensive, and you can feel around, you know, get a feel for it, and you can always resell that one. Point and shoot 35s are kind of cool, but I've always missed focus with those because it's usually they're autofocus, and they always hunt a lot, and and I get frustrated with them. So, but maybe your Contax one is better than what I've shot before, but, don't you have a Contax G?
I have a T2. That's
T2.
nice.
Yeah. But it's just going to be just playing with all the different cameras, and when we did the long live film workshop, and we're probably going to do another one, there will be so many different camera types there that you can kind of check out and play with. So that
nice workshop plug.
Yeah,
that got in really organically.
You like how
announce it already?
I did.
Yeah, let's. I think I brought this up a couple times earlier, just when I was showing different lenses. If you're jumping into medium format, something you need to learn so you don't buy the wrong lens is that when the millimeters of the lenses, the perspective changes when you jump into medium format. So I'd hate for someone to be just completely used to 35 millimeter film and then to jump into 6.7 and be like, oh, I want a 50 millimeter lens again. So you just want to look up a lens conversion chart. Like on my Pentax 6.7, my main lens is the 75 millimeter, but it looks like a 35 millimeter on 35 millimeter film. And that changes every time the negative size changes. What the lens is going to feel like to you if you're used to 35 millimeter film changes. And you can just Google that too, like lens conversion chart for.
I did that for years when I was like getting into 645, 6.7. I would always go look at the chart and be like, oh, I want like a 50. What is that? So it's a pretty common chart out there for people looking for.
And like on my 4x5 camera, I've got 135 millimeter lens, and it feels like a 32 or 35 millimeter still.
Yeah, just know that like the bigger the negative, the higher the number equivalent to the 35. So
yeah.
All right, let's go to metering. Metering is so important. That's one of the main, I guess, questions or issues that we see at the lab when someone says, hey, my film was too dark, or like, why does it look like this? And most of the time it's because they underexposed their film a pretty good bit, or overexposed it a lot. So Metering is, and although film is very forgiving, the better you meter and the closer you get the range that the film can handle correctly, we can produce a phenomenal image with our scanners. The scanners that we have can do an incredible job, even if it's underexposed or overexposed. But if you give us the right exposure, we can do a lot with it. We can make it look darker if you like that look. We can make it look brighter. Just give us the range and we can make the image look right. So there's different ways you can do that. There's an incident meter, which Sekonic makes so many different ones, everywhere from $200 to like $1,000. And then we have this reflective one, which I don't know if we can get into actually how this one would work. Maybe you can explain it better than I can. But Ryan got me onto this meter here, and it's a Pentax digital spot meter, and it's changed my life with film. I started with the Sekonic, and then I went to this thing, and it's like game changer. So maybe you can explain that a little bit better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, let's just jump into what the most fundamental difference between these meters are. Okay. With an incident meter, you hold it up and you've got a little bulb on it. And if you're shooting a person or you're shooting a landscape, you kind of hold it where the thing you're shooting is, and you set your ISO and you set your aperture and you click the button and it gives you a readout. What this meter is doing is taking all the light that's falling on it, the light, the dark, the midtones, and it's giving you an average of what those are. And now, theoretically, in a lot of lighting circumstances, that'll be fine because you want your exposure to be in the middle of all these lights and all these darks, so all the tones come out correctly. And it's so hard to cover all of it. And now people get into all these tricks with an incident meter. Like, I know I'm shooting film and I don't want to underexpose it. So what are my options here? I'm going to set the ISO to half of the film I'm actually shooting so that it always gives me one more stop. Or I'm going to take that bulb and I'm going to turn it into the camera so less light's hitting the bulb. So that will tell me, give me a setting where I'm going to overexpose the film. Or I'm going to point the bulb at the ground, and now I'm getting even less light, and now I know I'm not underexposing my film. And I was doing that for years, but then my friend Jan Schultz turned me on to this spot meter, which is a little more intimidating up front, but I vastly prefer it. Because with a spot meter, all it's doing is you point it at a thing, and it tells you how bright that thing is. And then you can point it at all these different things in the scene, and it'll tell you how bright all the things you just pointed it at are.
That'll make sense in a later slide when we have some other slides that are going to really clear that up, just so you know. It's not.
Yeah. So when I'm using this reflective meter, what I generally do is and we're going to talk about this with an image example, but I'll meter my highlights and I'll meter my shadows, and I'll see how far apart those actually are. And then I'll make a decision of what exposure I want to use to capture that detail. And hopefully that'll be a little more clear when we do an image example. But that's the basic difference, is one's giving you an average and the other is not. The other, you're pointing it at and it says that thing is this bright.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, this thing it's really great actually. If you have this, or if you want to get one of these, you set your ISO here, whatever film stock that you have. You can set your aperture, whatever your camera is, and there's a little button you click and you put it right in front of the face of your subject. You're shooting a portrait, and it'll give you the f-stop that you need.
I think the
shutter speed. Sorry,
I should say before we jump into all of this is there is no right answer. Everyone you talk to about how do you meter your film is going to have this multi-layered answer to how they do it, and the whole point is just finding the one that works for you
and consistent. Like, so that person that turns the bulb in and aims at the ground, they do that consistently, and they find their momentum. If then they tell you to do it, and your film might come out differently because they have other techniques that are built into that technique. And so it can be tricky, and then that's why I kind of like the spot meters, because it kind of takes out all that guessing. Which I've never gotten a bad reading on one of these. It's just if you're in kind of crazier lighting situations, it's like, where do I put it? And then, that doesn't sound right. You know what I mean? So this can be a little tricky. But if you're out in the open, just a big open field, and you have your subjects out there, this would work fine.
And I'm seeing this in the chat, so I'll point it out. This
Yeah.
picture we have of the incident meter actually has a spot meter built into it as well.
Oh, that's right.
Seikonic makes a lot of meters that have both into them. The reason I love the Pentax digital spot meter so much is it just has wheels you spin to line up your exposure. It's like
It's
a
so great.
kindergarten toy.
It
It
is
gives
so
you the numbers of what you metered, and then you just spin the wheel until they are on the spot you want them to be. And that helps me do it when I'm trying to think about other stuff.
Yeah, when you showed me that, I was so confused at first. I was like, this is going to be hard. And then when I realized what it was, it's so simple that it like blew my mind that they're locked in on this like grid. I was like, this is so on these dials. I was like,
we should keep going because I'm going to do a specific example when we get into the spot metering. Film existed before light meters did. So they had to come up with some way of figuring out what the exposure was. And if you ever found yourself without a meter at all and you were very, very confused, there's something called the Sunny 16 rule. And this is what it is. At f16, if you're trying to set your exposure on a film camera outside and you don't have a meter at all,
in full sun.
In full sun at f16, your ISO and your shutter speed are the same.
Yep, that's it. There you go.
So, and then obviously you're not always shooting at f16.
You can find it there. You can
find it. So let me do this like this image, just for example. So if this image was on 100 speed black and white film, it isn't, but I'm just going to say it is. If this image was on 100 black and white film and the sun's directly on him, I could set my camera to f16 and then the ISO of the film is 100. So I would set the shutter speed to 100. But then like on a lot of cameras, they only have full shutter stops. So you could set it either to 1/25 and be a little underexposed, or f60, okay, or a 60th of a second and be a little overexposed. And when I'm on a camera that only has whole shutter stops, I generally favor doing the one that overexposes it a little bit more. But now you say, well, I don't want to shoot the picture at f16. I want to use a different shutter speed. You can just go 1 and 1 on the aperture and shutter speed. So, okay, I'm f16 at a 60th. Well, now I'm going to open up the lens to f11. So I close the shutter speed down to 1/25. And now I'm going to open up again to f8. So now I'm at 2/50th. And I'm going to open up again to f5.6. So now I'm at 500. I'm going to open up again to f4. Now I'm at 1,000. So you can just find the combination of that. And then people say, well, what if you're not in full sun? Then you just kind of gauge, well, how many stops darker is it than the full sun? So, I mean, it's not foolproof, but I've kind of learned like, oh, okay, if I'm in the shade, it's like 3 or 4 stops darker than f16. And then I, just take 4 stops off of f16.
Yeah. Hence get a meter. Just kidding.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. And I just want to say, I know this can all feel overwhelming, and it's really kind of impossible to completely cover in an hour and a half class. Because I mean, I can talk for 2.5 hours just about metering, but I'm just going to kind of walk you through what I'm thinking about when I meter. I base all my metering in my head on as if I'm shooting black and white film. Even when I'm shooting color film, I think of my metering in terms of black and white, because black and white is more demanding than color film. There's less latitude, there's less room to mess it up. So when I'm shooting color film, as if I'm being careful, like I'm shooting black and white film, then I just know, like we already talked about, well, it's okay, I'm never going to blow my highlights. So I'll just make sure I have my shadow detail on black and white or color film. And then on black and white film, I'll see what happens to my highlights. And then on color film, I know they're just there. I base my metering on a really, really simplified version of Ansel Adams' The Zone system. And to put it in really basic terms, on a black and white film negative, there's 10 zones of information or tones that you could capture. 0 is basically pure black, no detail at all, no nothing, just solid nothing. That's a beautiful way to put it. And 9 or 10 basically is pure white, no detail at all. And the reason I threw these little stars on zone 3 and zone 7 is that, I mean, film's a little bit forgiving and you'll have a little bit more than this, but in theory, zone 3 and zone 7 are where you'll have complete detail in your blacks and complete detail in your whites. And you can kind of think of that like clipping, like your histogram on a digital camera. Like if your shadows don't fall below zone 3 and your highlights don't fall above zone 7, you're going to have full detail in there. So frequently, it's so hard to do without being in person.
Right.
But frequently when I'm metering something, whether it's with an incident meter or my spot meter, I'm metering, I mean, it changes all the time, but as a safe, easy way to teach you, I'm metering the shadow. You've probably heard people say that, meter for your shadows, meter for your shadows. Why they say that is because film's sensitive to underexposure. If you underexpose your shadows, you're gonna lose that detail. So typically when I meter, I will try to meter the shadow, the darkest thing in the image that I care about holding detail in. And then when you meter it, it's gonna give you zone 5. It's gonna give you the middle gray for the thing you just metered. And then if that thing is my shadow, I know I can use an exposure 2 stops darker than the thing I just metered, which would be zone 4, zone 3, and that shadow is going to still have 100% of the detail. Every time I start talking about this, it's like, even though I can't see people's faces, I can just feel the collective 110% energy of being like, what?
Yeah.
But on the next slide, I actually have some visual examples of where I did this that hopefully will help. Why I chose these 2 images is because these 2 images are right next to each other on a roll of film. Meaning I shot these images in the same lighting conditions, but using the zone system made a complete opposite decision. And I just want to kind of show how that works. So on the image on the right, I'm actually going to start on the right. I saw this lighthouse and I thought it looked really cool. And when I'm metering my scenes, I just talk myself through it. I just have the conversation about what I'm looking at. And I looked at this scene and I said, okay, you have Tri-X 400 film in your camera. It's a black and white film. You only have this zone 3 to zone 7 that are really going to have the full range of detail. So look at this picture and tell me what's happening. And I said, okay, the lighthouse looks really cool. The grass has got this kind of middle tone. Those dark bands in the top of it have some really nice shadow or blacks in them. And I want to capture that detail. And so then I said to myself, okay, and this is what I ask myself every time I'm shooting. What is the most important dark thing in this image? And I looked at it and I said, it's these little black bands on this lighthouse. And so I pointed my spot meter at the black bands and it gave me a reading. And then I said, okay, you can use an exposure 2 stops darker than that, and you will have full detail in those shadows. And that's what I did. And then you can point the meter around, and look at the other stuff. And then I pointed it at the sky and I was like, oh, hell. If I get full detail in the shadows, this sky is, 10 stops brighter than that. It's going to be basically completely gone. And I was like, and you just have to talk yourself through it. And I said, yeah, that's okay. That's what I want. That would be better than getting detail in the sky and just having this muddy lighthouse in front of me. And so that's how I shot it. But this very next frame on the left, this is on the path walking down from the lighthouse. I made the exact decision, and I just want to talk through that. I looked out through these trees and I was looking out at the sea and I thought, oh, this is a really cool shot. I could do a shot with some branches in the foreground looking out at the sky and the ocean. And I talked myself through it. You know, I said, well, what's the most important dark thing in this image? And I guess a more correct way to say it is, what's the most important dark thing that you want to have full detail in? Because if I made that exact same decision that we just talked about, and I metered these leaves in front and had all these detail in the leaves, because, you know, I'm looking at this with human eyes. I can see all the detail in everything. But when I metered the leaves and then dropped them down 2 stops again, the water and the sky out there would have been completely gone. And I was like, no, that's not what this picture is about. So I want to make the opposite decision. I want to meter the most important bright thing in this image, because the sea and the sky are the actual subject of this. And I want to keep detail in the water and the sky. So in this case, I metered the sky. And again, it gives you that middle gray zone 5 exposure. And this time I said, I can use an exposure that is 2 more than this and still have full detail in the water and sky. And so when I did that meter reading and I looked at it, then you can look, you know, just on the graph of like, well, what's going to happen to all these trees and leaves in the foreground? They're not going to have detail. They're just going to be black. And then in my mind, I thought, well, that's fine. That's a cool shot. They'll just be part of the silhouette, but I'll keep detail in these highlights. So the reason I use this to give this example is people say, well, what do you meter for? You meter for your highlights? You meter for your shadows? And the quick answer is I meter for my shadows because I don't want to underexpose my film. But the more correct answer is I talk myself through everything and say, well, what's important in this shot? Are the shadows important? Is the highlight important? And that's how I arrived at the different thing. And I just saw a question from Skylar Green, so I'm just going to go ahead and answer this. They said, could you also have just exposed the sky in the lighthouse image and overexposed by 2 stops and gotten the same result? And the answer is kind of, because the sky in this image was so much brighter than the other things that I was metering, that if I had based my metering on the highlight and then just brought that down 2 stops, the shadows and the midtones still would have fallen way too low. So that's why I say, what is the important areas of information in this photograph, and then just talk myself through them. And then just to quickly add one more thing, like I said, I base all my metering off of black and white. If this shot on the right of the lighthouse was in color, all the detail in the sky would still be there. I still would have metered the same way to keep detail in the shadows, but then the highlights on C41 color negative film would have all just magically stayed there. And then on the shot on the left, if it was in color, I would have had an interesting decision to make, because I could have metered the branches and the leaves and stuff and gotten full detail in them and still kept detail behind them in the sea and sky, but it would have had a totally different feel, because there'd be all that, it wouldn't be a silhouette anymore. There'd still be all this detail. So I actually didn't even want to do that, which is where choosing between black and white film can actually make a significant difference. That if I wanted to underexpose the image on the left on color negative film, it would have taken on a totally different feel of more grainy and color shift to get the same kind of silhouette feel. So that's where, you know, looking at a scene and saying, oh, this is a color shot, or this is a black and white shot for these specific reasons, to me, comes into effect. Sorry, I know that's an absolute mouthful, but I feel like actually looking at some pictures helps bring that zone 3 and zone 7 thing into focus. And I saw another question saying, can you explain what you mean by bring it down or bring it up? And that's a great point that I should have started at the very beginning. These zones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the difference between them is 1 stop of aperture or shutter speed. 2, 8, 4, 5, 6, 125th, 60th, 30th, all those changes are moving everything 1 up or down on this 0 to 10 scale. And I mean, when I teach workshops in person, I mean, I spend like 2.5 hours on this and walk around and meter everything in person and use an incident meter and use a spot meter and show 30 different examples of underexposing color film and blowing the highlights in the sky. And I mean, this is a 4-hour class all on its own, but it didn't feel right to just skip it. But I mean, it's such a deep dive.
It is, and it's all in what you want to do and how you want to capture. And a good example of this is if you're a wedding shooter and you have a couple just out in the open, and he has on a dark tux and she has on a bright white dress, which is pretty standard. You want to make sure that the detail stays in his suit and not worry about her dress, because the film is going to hold the detail. Whereas
on color negative, where on digital, you want to make sure that the detail and the highlights are there, because the digital is going to make sure that the shadows are going to be there, and you can bring it up and it's fine. It's the exact opposite with film. You want to make sure that your subject, the important part of the photo that you're capturing, has the detail in it where you want it. Whereas these weren't important for him. This was important for him. And this Mallory, that is, oh, sorry. I didn't know you weren't done talking. Mallory just asked, so you'd meter the suit and drop it down 2 steps using a reflective meter. And that's exactly right. I think I just want to give one more hypothetical of talking yourself through a shot of where it changes and why there isn't one answer. If my photographic assignment was to shoot Josh Moates, who is a fairly white man, in the black t-shirt that he is wearing, and he's sitting in contrasty light, like maybe he is, I would ask myself, what's the most important thing in this shot to keep detail in? If it's a picture of his face in this t-shirt, I'm going to say his face. This is a portrait. I can't let the highlight of his face go above zone 7. But we could flip this. If I was shooting a picture of a black man in a white shirt and it's a portrait, I would be asking myself, what is the most important thing for me to do in this picture? And I would say, artistically, no matter what, his skin cannot go below zone 3 or I'm going to lose detail in this face. And I'd probably even go so far as to placing his face at zone 4 or zone 5 or zone 6 or just whatever I decided artistically. But I'm saying I cannot lose detail in these shadows. So it's so hard to just give well, what do you meter for? And I'm like, I don't know.
Depends.
I look at the picture
I'm
about to take and I talk myself through it.
Right. What are we shooting and what's important? And that's what you meter for. And once you learn this zone system, you can use it for everything: portraits, landscape, anything. It's across the board the best system for knowing how everything is going to fall.
I just want to give a quick shout out to people in the comments too. I love you guys answering each other's questions that we can't get to. So thank you.
So let's go ahead.
I just wanted to bring this up as a visual that maybe kind of locks it into place for you. I'm talking about this. Well, zone 5 is right down the middle, and zone 7 is 2 stops brighter than the middle, and zone 3 is 2 stops darker than the middle. And I'm just trying to see where everything falls on this range. Maybe a more familiar way to visualize that to you is what you see at the bottom of every camera like this.
Right.
That arrow for your meter is zone 5. It's showing you -2 and +2 because those are very important ranges of information. And that little graph and this graph on the bottom are the exact same thing.
Right. And in camera, there's a couple different modes. So there's metering modes, right? So you have, I didn't have an example of this, but just say you have a Canon 5D Mark III or 4. Well, there's a spot meter mode, and you can literally put on spot meter and a little dot in the middle of your camera. If you aim it at the sky, depending on what settings you have, it will probably, you want it to be in here. And if you're aiming it at a dark shirt, you're going to see the meter kind of drop down here, depending on what your settings are. So if you have your meter set correctly, if you aim it at, say, my forehead, I should be right in here. And if you aim it at my black shirt, you're going to see this little green thing jump down to here. So it all depends on what you're shooting, like we were talking about. But this system is based on this system here by Ansel Adams. So if you have a DSLR or a camera that has this kind of meter in it, you're going to see this little, and this is plus on this side. Canon's goes this way, and Nikon, the plus I think is on this side. The overexposure is on this side.
Those Nikon bastards.
They flipped it. flipped. It can't do it right. And when you screw it on, it's opposite to it's all anyway. So you're going to see a little light in there that indicates where you're at on your meter. And if you have it in spot meter mode, whatever you aim it at, that little dot it's really cool because you can accurately pinpoint sections of your photograph and you can see where they fall. And if they fall too dark, if you're aiming at my face and this light is -2, you're going to want to slow your shutter speed or raise your ISO to get it to where you need it to go. So,
this is just so hard to do over Zoom.
It really is
such an interactive subject of walk around and meter everything, but
yeah,
we did our best.
I played with that meter, like just walk around with it forever and was like, oh, okay, I get it. So getting the meter is step one. So if you want to go a very simple route, an easier route, or to start, you can. And this has been a really accurate. If I don't have my meter, I'll definitely use this. It's just the app's called Light Meter, and it's free. And it's just you can tap on the screen on what you want to meter. And I was metering for film, so I wasn't worried about this blowing out because film's going to hold it. I was worrying about making sure that I see this side of his face, because in film, this is obviously this is a digital photo from my screen. You can see this is all blown out. And so when I'm shooting film, I want to make sure that I get, I click on an area that's a darker part of the photo so that it exposes correctly for film. Although if you're shooting digital, like say you have a 5D and you're out and you can transfer those same settings over. Just make sure that your film on the back of your digital camera is like overexposed. Make it look like it's about to be blown out. You're like, that's way too bright for digital. It's going to be perfect for film. That's what I've always said. Yeah.
Remember that the digital and film, it's not a straight across conversion.
It's not. Just make sure that when you shoot the digital shot and it's like, whoa, that's way too bright for digital, it's going to probably be perfect for film. So you can use that same setting and drop it in your film camera and it'll probably be fine.
Let's get away from metering. I'm having a panic attack.
Okay. So why use a Pro Lab, Ryan? Why should we use Indie Film Lab? It's a straight plug.
Do I use Indie Film Lab? Have I been using you guys?
I think so.
Just kidding. I've used Indie. Man, what is it now? Do we know how long I've been using you guys?
No, but I remember the call. I'll never forget.
I'll
never forget the call. That was a pretty cool.
I send everything to Indie Film Lab and I absolutely love it. I mean, I know I'm here talking for them, so you can assume it's an advertisement, but it made such a phenomenal difference to me. I don't like working in Photoshop and Lightroom. I don't like tinkering with my own stuff. I'm not that good at it. Every time I shoot digital and I pull it into Lightroom and then I have all my friends' preset packs and I click one and I go, okay. Nope. And then I click the next one and I'm like, okay, not even nope, just like, does that look better?
Yeah.
And I just sit there and I'm like, I have no idea. I'm not good at this. I love focusing on shooting and having, I mean, you got the list here, but for me, it's been the personal relationship. On the very first time I started using Indie, I talked to Josh and I was like, Josh, here's the deal. I love film. I'm not a wedding shooter. It's impossible to send your film to a lab where you're trying to shoot dark, moody stuff. They pull it up on their scanners and they're like, oh Lord, it's so dark. And they just pump 13 stops more of exposure into it so that you'll be happy and they send it back to you. I'm like, that's not what I'm doing. I know how to meter. I know how to look at light. I want this dark, moody look. I know it's possible. Movies shoot film. They can do it. Can we do it? And it just started that thing of like, absolutely, shoot some stuff, send it in, show me how you like your work to look, send me example images. If we get a scan wrong, pull it into Lightroom and show me what you would have done, what you were visualizing, send it back to us. And it just started this, like, I don't know what it is, like 10-year cycle of people that were actually involved in my creative process, that actually cared, that really got to know me, that then were delivering me images that for so many intents and purposes are almost done. I posted an image of Yan Palmer, one of my good friends, and her son the other day, and they were shot in some crazy light. It was in her house. It was crazy bright light coming through, and there's this beam of bright light hitting his forehead. And on Yan's, she's standing in bright light, but her hands are leaving the light and going into shadow, and they just look phenomenal. And someone wrote on my Instagram that said, what are you doing with these when you get them back from the lab? Like, how are you making them look like this? And I said, I don't want to bullshit you, but like, honestly, nothing. These haven't been through Lightroom. They sent me the Dropbox link saying your scans are ready. I opened it on my phone. I was like, oh Lord, those are beautiful. I hit save to phone and I posted them straight to my Instagram. And so often that's the case. I'll get in and fiddle with contrast, but the times I spend more than 15 seconds working on a scan I get back from Indy is rare. And I mean, that's a two-way street. I'm really good at metering. I'm really good at finding the light I want to shoot in and choosing the right stock to shoot it in and metering the way I want to capture the detail like we just talked about. It's not just a magic pill of like, send your shit to them and they'll make it look good no matter what. But it is this very symbiotic. I went so long without swearing and then I just gave up.
You just had to do it. Yeah.
It's this very symbiotic relationship of like, I trust them and they trust me. If I shoot some almost black shot with just a silhouette of light around a profile, they don't have to get it and be like, oh, you ruined it. It's fine. We'll save it. We'll add all this exposure to it. I'm just getting a group of people that actually understand my work that I'm communicating with. Both times I've really got in, John used to scan my film at Indy and he moved on. And now Garrett does, almost forgot his name. That wouldn't be good for the video. Edit that out where it looks like I just remembered it right away. We had these long conversations of like, look, this is who I am. This is what my work's supposed to feel like. This is why I'm shooting it like this. And that's available. And it just turned into this, like, this is the best. I don't think about the images, the film technical part of it while I'm shooting. I mean, other than like metering and stuff, but I'm not like, I'm focused on shooting. And then I send the negatives back and 99% of the time they come back where I'm like, that's it, that this is what I want it to be. And that's such a gift to me, because when I'm 40 minutes into moving Lightroom sliders, I'm not like, I got it, this is the best. I'm like, I hate photography. I hate this. So, and that changes from person to person, but working with a pro lab that understands me and I could have conversations with about what I wanted it to be was just a life changer. Honestly.
And you don't have to be Ryan Muirhead to get that kind of with us. Like, honestly, when you reach out to us and communicate with us what you want, we lock it in. It's a building a relationship. I get, when we first started the lab, I would get folks that would go online and say, I got this film back and I'm not happy with it. And everyone is like, call the lab. Like, if we don't know, if we don't get the notes, or if we don't know who you are, right? If you send your first order in, it's like, let's talk, let's get it going. Like, we can't just guess what you're going for. I mean, we get an idea, but if you don't tell us, we're going to do the best we can. But if the best we can is not what you're looking for, we need to know, we need to talk. So that's where that personal relationship comes in.
It's so individual too, because you could be going for such a different thing. I mean, Shannon Tomasik's a really interesting example too, because she's shooting a lot of Cinestill and sending it to you guys, but she's underexposing it all the time, where it takes on this crazy grain and these color shifts and this whole different palette. And for some people, it could be, hey, this roll got ruined. Teach me more and let's talk about what's happening. Whereas with her, it could be like, my God, please don't try to correct these. I figured out how to meter like this and use a specific film type to get this crazy lo-fi, grainy, colored blue texture. And if you were to pull that scan up and be like, you ruined it again, you underexposed your 100th roll, it's okay. I'm going to add 5 stops of it. And we'll try and add some contrast back and we'll drag the black point in and we'll try and add some warmth to correct for that. You'd ruin what they were actually going for.
That's a great
point. I mean, that's where this conversation just is everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's all personal. So it really just depends. I mean, you can't do the same thing for everyone. It just doesn't work that way. But jumping into some of this other stuff is like scan size. You have so many options with what size file we can get to you. The custom color profiles is kind of exactly what he's talking about, knowing who you are, what you want, and creating a profile for you. We have professional scanner operators. We have people who know all about the scanners, is going to get the best results. Highest quality scanners, we have two, which we're going to cover in a little bit. We have dip and dunk processors, which are these really huge machines that are really rare that we found, and nothing touches your film but the chemistry. And they're just really, really cool. And they're just there's so many things I can talk about the processors alone, because they were a really cool find. But just know that like they're really big, and we'll do a lab tour one day for sure. But big vats of chemistry that your film goes into. It's really cool.
I can't stop laughing when Jackie appears.
Yeah, she's like,
it's
guys,
like summoning a genie or something.
Little do you know how accurate that is. So there was a question in the comments about the best way to communicate, and I just wanted to hop in real quick.
Yeah.
We will do a demo a little bit later for those of you that haven't sent film to Indy before, about how to actually place an order with us, and you'll see a space in there where you can leave notes to the lab. But a great way to reach out, even if you've been sending to us for a while, or if you are a new client, send us an email, orders@indyfilmlab.com. Like, introduce yourself, send some images that you are stoked about. When you create your client profile, make sure your website and your Instagram account are on there. Like, we want to know your work, and the more information you give us, the more we're going to be able to kind of connect your film with you. And we'll talk a little bit more about the process corrections and that kind of stuff here in just a second. But reaching out to the lab is a great starting point. If you've got work that that you've got references for, even if it's digital references, if you shot hybrid and you've got some color references that you want to send along, send those. We're not going to make your film look like digital. Hopefully it'll go the opposite way. But if I need to know that the bride's dress is blush and not white, then tell me that. I want you to love your scans when you get them back. So hopefully that answers that question there. I know we'll talk a little bit more about what corrections and scanning and stuff looks like. So let's move on to that. But I wanted to hop in and add that.
Right. And there's one thing we do as a pro lab that, like, with drugstores, or I don't even know if drugstore is a thing anymore, but some other maybe smaller, I don't know what I'm getting at, but just, we are so insane about our chemistry. It's unreal. We use Kodak chemistry, and we run test strips, and just the machines that we use are, you're going to, if there's an error with, like, it's not going to be in the chemistry. It's going to be in the in the exposure of the film. Basically what I'm saying is, like, our chemicals are fresh. We order so much chemistry from Kodak, and it's just a huge part of it, knowing that we have all that down pat. So just on the technical side of things. But anyway, let's move on. I can talk about our lab all day, because it's like you're my baby, So let's talk about scanners. So we have two different type. There's only basically two different scanners available in the production world, and it's Noritsu HS1800 and a Frontier SP3000, which both have unique characteristics, which we're going to cover. Just right off the bat, the Noritsu is newer technology, probably built in 2001, 2002 era.
Brand new technology.
Brand new technology 20 years ago. But for us, this is it. This is the last production scanner made as far as production and, doing a fast, lot amount of, like, tons of film. This is it. And then you have older technology, which is the Frontier, which is basically like Windows 2000 or Windows XP or something. It's like very, very old, but it is holding its own in this day and age. And let's cover some of that. So I don't know if I don't know if you can tell in this photo. This is a shot on 6.7 Portra 800. I shot on an RZ67. And there's a video on our YouTube channel that covers this even more, because I can go into this, like I said, another hour just in this. which I did a quick YouTube video covering this. Noritsu is I don't know exactly how to say it, but in very like basic way, the Noritsu scans have a little bit warmer shadow. The Frontier has a little bit cooler shadow, if you can tell by in their outfits here. They're both very high resolution. They're both beautifully done. Like, they're beautiful in their own right. The Frontier has a little bit more kind of vintage kind of vibe to it, and the Noritsu has more of an updated kind of vibe to it. If you watch the video, I go into way more detail than that, which I don't have time to do in this particular thing. But Ryan has a good story on his experience with the Frontier and the Noritsu.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this. Like, when I started using Indie Film Lab, I had done a little bit of scanning on both, and I was like, you know what? The Frontier's for me. It's got that feel I like. It, I don't know. It just is. It just is the one for me. And for like 8 years or 8.5 years, I had every single thing done on the Frontier, every single image. And to me, it's important to have the same person scanning my film, because I want them to build this knowledge of like, oh, I know what this looks like. And I was using John, who used to work at Indie, and he was on the Frontier, and it was amazing. And then John moved on, and so I had to have this conversation. I called Indie, and I was like, hey, who's the right employee for me? Who's going to get this? And they're like, Garrett. I think Garrett for you. And they're like, but he's on the Noritsu. And for, a hot second, I was like, no, no. But then I just had this thing of like, what's more important to you, working on this scanner or working on someone that gets your work? And I was like, oh, the person for sure, whatever. So when I switched to Garrett, we had this call, and I called him up, and we just did this whole thing. And I was like, this is my work. This is what it should look like. This is what it should feel like. I'm not used to the Noritsu. I'm not used to these scans. So like, can you take this image and scan it for me? And then and we just went back and forth on it. And now I'm 100% Noritsu. And the images you saw of Yan and her son and everything I've posted in the last year has been Noritsu. And the eye-opening thing for me was like, sure, you can prefer a scan. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to say. I actually developed and scanned a couple of rolls myself here at home, and I used the Frontier again. And I was like, oh, this shot looks great. This shot looks great. And then I mailed the negs to Indy, and I was like, hey, will you just run these through Garrett and the Noritsu? And he sent my order back. And on some of the frames, I was like, oh, the Frontier, I like it more. And then on 2 frames later, I was like, oh, the Noritsu handled this shot better. And it's not this massive swing. I don't want to give you a panic about like it got ruined because it wasn't on the right scanner. But the whole lesson I learned was like, oh, they're both great. And if you have a person that scans your work that you connect with on this scanner, and you like the workflow of the scanner, because the Noritsu is quicker. It can bulk load a roll. It can scan it all at the same time. Like the turnaround time on the, well, I don't want to speak for you. I don't know if that's true.
You're right.
Yeah, the turnaround time on the Noritsu is quicker. You can get your scans back quicker this way. And I just learned I really don't care anymore. I want a talented person who cares about my work scanning it. And there's not so much of a difference as I would say it's got to be this one. I like it one better on certain shots and then turn around into the opposite light. And I like the other scanner better. So I just settled on, I want to like the person scanning my film.
Yeah, that's a good point. They both have their own special superpower, but they're both amazing. The quality is amazing on both. Let me go to the next slide. I think there's okay. So this video. Hold on, let me pause this real quick.
Understand how much?
Shut up. All right. So this video is me going through the software with a Noritsu, showing you how much control we have. I'm going to shut up because that's exactly what I say in the video, but you might want to turn your speaker up a little bit for this, and then make sure you turn it back down at the end because it's kind of quiet. So let's just listen to this real quick.
I want to make sure that you guys understand how much control we have over your negative and how much control we have over your final product. And this is the Noritsu software. It's a little more archaic than, say, Lightroom, but it has a lot of control and a lot of power. I want to show you how much detail is in this file. So I'm going to go over here to our overall contrast, and I'm going to bring it all the way down to show you how much detail is in this file versus what the scanner first showed us. I'm going to lower the shadow, I'm going to lower the highlights. We can literally do anything to your file and make it look however we want. So communication with us is important. We have a thing called inspiration scans where you can send us files for us to kind of mimic. That way we know what you're going for and we can get that. So just judging by how much information this this negative has, I can make it look a million different ways. So let me bring this back up to normal and let's look at correcting this file properly. Well, for my liking, this is my negative. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to lower the contrast a little bit. I'm going to lower the shadows and I'm going to raise the highlights up just a tad. And that's really all I would do to this file here. And so those are the contrast controls. I can go up here and look at the exposure and the density. I can show you again how much control we have using the Noritsu software to get it exactly how you want it. Now, if we do have to make these extreme adjustments, like getting into these higher numbers and letters, there's going to add a bunch of grain or digital noise to your file. And to keep from doing that, you want to shoot it kind of how you want it in camera so that it's a cleaner file or cleaner end result. So to me, this looks soft. It is exactly how I would want it. And any other tweaks I can do in Lightroom to get it exactly how I want it and even more consistent. So let's go over here to the color. This is a image Thomas shot. It is, to me, this coming out of the scanner looking like this is actually really great. So he metered it kind of how he wanted it in camera. But let me just show you how much power and control we have over this negative using this software. And I'm just going to lower or brighten the exposure all the way up. And all this information is there. And let me go to the exact opposite and show you how much information is in this negative. So it is impressive what this film has. And let me go into the contrast setting and show you exactly how much. I'm going to lower all these and show you how much is in there. So it's really good for us to know exactly what you're going for in your inspiration scans and for the color and all that, because as you can see, we can do whatever. And to further that, let's put these back. And to further that, I want to show you how we actually color correct. This is nowhere near what Lightroom can do, but as far as scan software goes, especially old scan software, because no one's making new software anymore, this is actually pretty great. So with the yellow, we can add yellow or take away yellow. So we can do a lot to this file. We can cool it off, warm it up, and then we can go over to the magenta and we can do the same thing. We can add magenta, take away magenta, and pretty much do whatever we want, or actually whatever you want. And then the cyan, we can do the same thing. So being able to add or subtract these colors out of your file or out of your negative is super important to get the color just right. We can do whatever to your file, and metering is so important in this part of the process so that we can get it right in scanner. That's it.
Beautiful.
Make sure that you guys understand.
Yeah, hold on. Let me figure out how to go to the next slide. There we go. So basically, what I said it all in the video, but we have a lot of control, and you can tell. So that was the Noritsu software and the Frontier adjustments. The computer is so old I couldn't even do a screen grab of the screen. That's how old it is. So, and I didn't want to like break the computer by trying to do that. So I just grabbed screenshots of the options that the Frontier software will give us, and we can control it from there. But as you can tell, there is a ton of information in your negative. All we're doing is getting a snapshot of that negative to your liking. That's all we're doing. So the Frontier adjustments, like I said, they're just it's a machine, like a big desk that you sit at, and the controls are built into the desk. So it's not like more software, it's more hardware based. So it's a pretty amazing machine. But it's a little, they kind of dumbed it down for like, Walgreens to use, but it's still a pretty amazing machine. So,
and I mean, just to circle back to my first point,
Yeah.
I was shooting all this moody, low light, window light stuff that maybe looks like this lowered exposure frame. And if you just send it off to somebody without having a conversation about it, they might look at it and be like, whoa, it was so dark, but don't worry, we got you. There's so much detail in this negatives. We can make it look like this all soft one like that. And I kept, not from Indy, but from a lab I was using before, like they couldn't stop doing it because all their work was wedding work. And I sent in this dark work and they were like, don't worry, Ryan, we got you. It was dark, but you're going to get it back all bright.
That's awesome.
And that was my first call. Josh was like, let's do this. Like, I know it's dark. I know how to meter. I want to see it. And we did. Like the first shoot I sent back was this really moody stuff in a basement room. And they killed it because we had that conversation and we had that personal relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about that relationship for sure. So let's just go through a really quick on we get this question a lot, like, oh, what should I choose? Should I choose large or extra extra large? And this was a very challenging part of when we started the lab, is like how to name these guys, because but I had to say, let's draw a line, because Noritsu is its own thing, Frontier is its own thing. So we kind of couldn't label them the same, although we kind of got it close. But for instance, like Noritsu 35, if you choose large, here's the dimensions you're going to get, and based on a 180 DPI, you can get 11 by 17. And an extra large, you're going to get 24 by 36, and that's a 35 negative. I've printed the extra large even larger than that, and it's fine because of the normal viewing distance. I can't get into the whole print thing, but basically how it works is, even though it might come out a little grainy or a little pixelated, people aren't looking at it from 2 inches away like we would as psychopath photographers. But if you step back 4 to 5 feet, those things all blend together and it looks gorgeous. We printed, like I said, one of Ryan's like 30 by 40. It was insane. And it looks killer. And so I wouldn't worry so much about that as long as you pick the right size. I just printed a 6/7 frame for a house. It was like 40 by 50 something, and it was gorgeous. Medium format, the same thing. You're going to get a 30 by 40. There's only one size medium format that we do. Other companies do say that there's a smaller frame that you can order, but all they do is resize it in Lightroom, and we just want to give you the biggest file size possible. So there's only one option for medium format on Noritsu. Here's the Frontier sizes, 11 by 17 on the large, 16 by 24, 24 by 36 on the extra large. All this information is on our website, so I just want to run through it really quick, just so that we're all on the same pages.
And just choose what works for you. If you're never printing at all, first off, shame on you, but we'll get to that later. Just kidding. But I mean, if you're not printing, the large scan sizes are going to look amazing for you, if it's mainly for internet use. For me, being able to print my work is super important, so I get the largest scan size on all my orders.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's what we offer, and they're great. So here's a great example of what we offer: two kind of corrected or uncorrected. We offer two different versions of your scans. One is, and this is only for the Noritsu. If you order the Noritsu, there's an option to get it uncorrected. And what that means is we run the film through the Noritsu, and we let the Noritsu choose it's almost like auto on your DSLR. You set it to auto color, auto everything. It's going to give you what it thinks is the best. And that's kind of what uncorrected is for the Noritsu. It's giving you what the computer and the scanner feels like is the most balanced photo. But as you can tell, sometimes it gets it wrong, especially for Ryan's work. So uncorrected.
This is such a perfect example.
Right. So we have Garrett who said, no, this is too blown out. This is not what Ryan's going to like. I'm going to make some adjustments like I showed you in the video, and let's get it more in line of what Ryan is going to want. And this is just a great example of that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what I would add to that. Other than that's why I love whatever. I don't have anything to say. You just said it. Like in this image on the right, where people might go of like, oh, it's a bright light. I want these nice bright tones. My work feels so much more subdued to me that it's like, no, make the bright thing more like a mid-tone, but keep the detail in the shadows. And that's exactly Garrett did this for this video? Because I mean, the shot's
yeah.
like 5 years old, so it's not an old scan.
No, he rescanned
That's
it.
amazing. Well, I have like 120,000 rolls of film. I'm just going to send them all back in to see what Garrett can do.
Okay, if you're listening.
Just kidding. But I mean, I love that one on the left. It's actually, I don't know how funny it is to anyone else, but this is a shoot from a long time ago. And it wasn't in the first version of the slideshow that we did. And they just added it and it came up and I was like, whoa, I love that. That's beautiful. And I was like, that's your shot, buddy. I was like, oh, nice. Good job, me.
You shoot so much, man. You can, but yeah, you could just tell like how much detail is here and it's not blown out. And it just doesn't, it looks like this is your work. This is what the scanner thinks your work should look like. So yeah. It's a great example of corrected and uncorrected.
Josh, we have a Jeannie question.
All right, Jeannie.
I have a quick question. Okay, so is getting standard or uncorrected scans and then editing them yourself, is that the same thing?
Not necessarily. So for instance, like I was showing you earlier in the software. So if I brought this photo into Lightroom and tried to get this back, I could get kind of close. But you're going to run into a couple of issues with grain and digital noise because you're working with a JPEG. It only has so much latitude. So working in the scanner, you're not adjusting a JPEG. What the scanner actually does is it takes like a super high-end raw photo, which is like basically every option. And then when we make the adjustments, then it rescans it as the settings that you've chosen. So it's actually working with a raw file versus a JPEG. Now, if you are working with uncorrected files, you can get away with a lot of stuff, but you're not going to get this amount of, I would say, detail and clarity. You probably could get pretty close, but the corrected just makes it so much easier and so much cleaner than trying to pull this back in Lightroom. You could. I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying this is just better.
I mean, the raw versus JPEG is the perfect way to think of it. When it's sitting on the scanner, it's a raw file and the amount of changes you can make are gigantic. When you get it back, it's a JPEG and the amount of changes you can make are still significant. I mean, when I shot all my underwater stuff with Birdie, it was all washed out. Not anybody's fault, just shooting through 20 feet of water washed it out. And I did a ton of contrast and levels on those images on the JPEGs to make the images maybe you've seen, and I loved it. But if you have the chance to get it as close to possible in the scanner with the corrected scans, it's a much better jumping off point.
It's a great, yeah, exactly. So we can do a lot more with that.
I'll add in one thing there too as well, which is just that when you get corrected scans from Indy, not only are they being corrected in the scanner, but they also go to corrections. And our corrections department, of which I am one, we actually will tweak the scans in Lightroom for both consistency, to take out any inconsistencies that may have happened in scanner, as well as client preference. So like we're part of that equation as well, like learning what the client's like and making sure, having that conversation with the scanner, no, I talked to Ryan and with this shoot, he really was hoping that this, this is where the shadows would be. Maybe that means a rescan. Maybe we get it in Lightroom, but like it is corrected at least twice before you see it when you send your film to Indy and have it scanned.
Yeah, that's
pro
exactly
corrections.
Right. Mm-hmm. Because either way, with either scanner, there's some inconsistencies with the way the scanner works. Each frame is calculated individually. So it has its own, like, if this same frame was shot, a foot off, like if her face was more over to the side, it's going to get more chair and it's going to say, oh, there's more green there. It's going to have more magenta. And we try to correct that with just in the software, but it's almost impossible until we get it into Lightroom. So small consistency changes, but yeah, exactly. We do a lot in Lightroom after the fact for consistency. But bringing this back, you might have pretty good luck. It's just not going to look as clean as this. So,
Josh, Ryan Spears has a great question that I don't actually know the answer to.
Oh, okay, what's up?
He says, do you get more latitude if you get the TIFF scans?
No. So and so technically, if you on paper, you can say TIFF has it's you're not destroying the file when you edit it. So yes to that. But where I think where film comes into play in that scenario is we've done so many tests with and I'm talking myself out of a higher end scan because it costs more money to do TIFFs. I'm shooting you straight here. I would not worry if you're not doing a ton of editing to it and you don't want to destroy your file, get a TIFF. That's fine. Get it. But I've done so many tests between the JPEG and TIFF because when people started asking for it, I was like, this is going to take way longer. The files are massive. And, do we even want to do this? So I did some comparisons and I was like, it's not really worth it to get the TIFFs.
It's like more of the change is happening as the scan happens than it is in the output of the file.
Right.
I get all my work in JPEGs.
Yeah. And if you really want, like we have clients who are like, we have to have TIFFs. I'm like, hey, dude, that's fine. That's cool. It takes a lot longer and it's a lot more storage space for us. So it's going to cost more and it, just how it is. But if you want a TIFF and you know what it can do, or if you are comfortable with working with TIFFs, then get them. But in my comparison versus the JPEG and TIFF, there's not much. There's no difference in the quality. There's no difference in the resolution. There's no difference in anything other than when you adjust your JPEG, you're technically damaging it. But I haven't really run into a situation where I'm like, wow, I really need a TIFF. But that's just me. So if you want to,
just like you said, if you're doing a lot of editing to your files, maybe you would want that. I don't do that much.
But you're not going to get a raw. You're not going to get a raw file. It's just all a TIFF is versus a JPEG is it doesn't damage the file when you edit it. That's all it is. You're not getting more leeway. You're not getting more resolution. You're not getting more dynamic range. You're not getting anything other than when you adjust it, it's not damaging it. But when you say damaging it, man, I've adjusted JPEGs. Like I have the files that say, so-and-so and so-and-so edit 1, up 2 and 3. Like yours, right? Yours are like, you'll have a thing this long that's like, kind of different little edits, that you've made. And those do not damage they look great. So I don't think that's like something you have to worry about, So hope that answers your question. It's kind of open-ended, I guess. All right. Let's talk about pushing film. This is something that if you're just starting film, I wouldn't really touch. I get used to shooting at box speed first. So any film that you shoot, I would suggest shooting at box speed. Portrait 800, I've shot Portrait 800 at 400. It looks beautiful. I've rarely shoot it at 800, so I'm not sure I'm sure Ryan, but
I do all the time. I shoot my Portrait 800 at 800 every time.
Awesome. So when basically pushing film, we're going to explain a little bit more, but I just want you to get comfortable with the concept of what it is so that when we're talking about it, you understand what we're saying, or if it's on the order form, you understand what's going on. But basically, when you start out with film, I would suggest shoot it at everything at box speed and get used to that first. Get used to how that's going to come out and get used to all that. And then this is kind of like the next level kind of thing. And I'm going to, this first image is mine. I shot at the fair like 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm going to tell you the reason why I pushed this film. And I'm going to let Ryan talk about why he pushed this film because they're kind of different scenarios. For me, pushing film, it's a speed ISO film. And I can almost magically turn it into a 3200 speed film. Where you're going to ask, how do you do that? Well, we do it at the lab in the chemistry. So this Tri-X at 400, it was night, it was dark, as you can tell, and there's one light coming through the tent. And so I said to myself, well, I have 400 speed film in, and it's dark. I shot the entire roll at 3200. I made the ISO on the camera and the meter say 3200, right? So I set it to 32. So now my camera thinks I have 3200 speed film in. I do not have 3200 speed film in. I have 400 speed film in. But I need 32 to make this exposure happen. If I shot this at 400, this elephant would have been black and I would have just seen like inside the tent. Well, I didn't want that. That's what goes back to the metering we talked about. I knew that I needed this to be exposed properly. I needed this to be in zone, like, 4, this in 5, like whatever. So I knew all this. And so I said, I need to make this 3200 speed film. So what I did was I set my ISO 3200. I shot the entire roll and I gave it to Thomas and I said, hey man, I need you to push this to 3200. So what that means is I leave it in the chemistry longer, and it develops longer. So anything that the light hits, which is like this area here, this area, anything that's not pitch black, and it brings it out more. So what does that do? That adds a little more contrast, a little more grain, but I'm fine with that because I'd rather have a grainy photo of this scene than nothing at all. And so for me, when I push film, it's not for the creative part of it. It's the way it looks super contrasty or moody. It's not for that reason. It's so that I can actually get the shot that I want, because I didn't have any 3200 speed film with me. But Ryan shoots it a little differently, and I'll let him explain that. But I hope that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I'm just going to go over one more technical detail of pushing film really quick that it's really important for people to understand. When you push the film and you're developing it longer, what it is doing is pushing the midtones and highlights away from the shadows. And a great way to visualize this is think of holding a rubber band. And you've got your shadows right here, and you've got your midtones right here, and you've got your highlights right here when you're holding it just small. I really should have had a rubber band on me for this, but you get it. And then when you're pushing it, yes, you're pushing it like this. And as you can see, the shadows don't really move, but the midtones and highlights stretch away from the shadows. And in these next 2 images I'm going to talk about, you'll be able to see visually where that happened. In this first Rolleiflex image of my friend Rachel, we were inside this old crazy Airstream at this campground in Washington on the ocean. And I wanted to make a portrait, but I had 400 speed film in my camera, but I didn't have enough light to do that. And so I said, if it was 1600 speed film, I would have enough light to make this shot. So I'm going to rate this roll of film at 1600 and tell Indy to push it 2 stops in development. And what that did is it brought the midtones and highlights of like her sleeve facing the light and the light on her face and the light on the pillow and the light on her arm. It brought those from very dark to bright. But if you'll notice on like the backside of her sleeve and her hair and the wall behind her where the light was not hitting, it did not increase the detail. And that's a very, very important thing to understand, because I wouldn't want you to get into a situation where you were in very low light and maybe you were shooting a black person and it was a portrait of them and you said, oh, I don't have enough light to shoot this, and their face is the darkest thing in the frame, but I'll just push the film in development and that will make it magically show up. Pushing film pushes the midtones and highlights away from the shadows. The only way to get full detail in the shadows is to have them be no lower than zone 3 at the native ISO of the film. And this next shot is a great example of that. I was in this really dark room in the Pacific Northwest with my friend Lauren, and it was raining outside, and we shot all these cool shots. And then I just said while we were on the floor, like, turn your face towards me. And I was already pushing the film 2 stops because there wasn't enough light. And this is an example of where it came into play, like artistically. Because from metering her face, I knew her face was the shadow in this shot. You know, even though she's a very pale white person, just from metering all over the scene, the light or lack thereof on her face was the darkest thing in this scene. And I thought, well, if I push the film, this light hitting, I'm pointing at it on my screen, the light hitting the side of her face and her collarbones and her chest and the little bit of light on her hair and the light on the floor in front of her, that will get pushed far enough to show up as a like mid-tone and almost highlight in this shot. But the shadow detail of her face did not move at all. Pushing the film did not recover that detail in her face. So I think it's both artistically cool and good to teach about from a technical perspective right there. And just some notes that people are probably going to ask. If you push a roll of film, it pushes the entire roll of film. So you got to make that decision up front. If you want to push the roll, you got to push the whole thing.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you covered it. I mean, I'm not sure.
Oh, someone just asked about C41. Oh, I wish I would have had one of the Iceland images.
Oh yeah, those are beautiful.
Because that would be such a good demonstration thing. I don't. Sorry, I have a gallery on my whatever. Sorry. So when you're pushing color negative film, in addition to increasing the grain, you're also going to get some color shifts. I would say the colors are going to render on that film a little bit differently than you're used to. And if you run out of light and you just need to get the shots, great. You'll just understand that it's going to look a little bit differently. But I even did it artistically. I went on this trip to Iceland and I was like, it's going to be overcast. It's going to be rainy. It's going to be all these mountains and glaciers. I want some like dark feel to these. So I went crazy. I took Portra 160 film and I metered it as if it were 800 speed film. So it was already 2 stops underexposed to get grainy and color shifty. And then I pushed the film in development as well. So it took on, like, I lost all the shadow detail from the underexposure and pushing, and the shadows got this like magenta tone to them and they got very contrasty, but I loved the look of those. But that's a big decision to make because I can't do crap with those JPEGs. I did so much in underexposure and development changes that, I mean, there's not much edits to be made on those, even if I wanted to.
Well, they look incredible though.
Someone had a question. So if I'm using Portra 400 and set the camera ISO to 200, what setting do I put in the light meter? I'm not sure they're talking about pushing, because when you're pushing, you set the ISO higher than the film you have in the camera. And then you write on the film canister with a Sharpie, +1, 400 ISO instead, 800 ISO. You write the amount of stops you pushed on there, and we'll go through that in the order form. But
yeah, so we have a video on our YouTube channel more about pushing, and it goes into more detail about that, about writing it on the roll that you're going to do, that you're going to send in and that you're going to push.
So Jason's question was, is it the same for color as black and white? And I guess I just want to answer that in a shorter sentence. When you push film, it adds grain and contrast. And that is true in both color and black and white. But when you push color film, it can also introduce color shifts. And I wouldn't call them drastic. I would just say, like, pushed Portra 160 does not have the same color palette as not pushed Portra 160, but it's not drastically different. It's just noticeable.
Gotcha. Yep. All right, let's go to the next one. So Jackie suggested that we skip this order thing. What do you think? How many people we got? We're hanging on here. Do y'all want to?
I have to pee. I drank a lot of water.
Yeah, I hear
you. You make the decision.
Yeah, if you, Ryan, if you want to step away for a second, and we've got a short video on just how to place an order with Indie. We can play that here and give you guys kind of a heads up on like how to place an order, what that interface is going to be like. I think we can go ahead and play that, Josh, and give Ryan a minute. And then when we get back, if you guys, while this is going, if you guys want to think about any questions that you have, we will do a real short Q&A after the order video. So y'all be thinking about your questions and put them in the chat, and I'll be reading those for you, as well as Ryan and Josh will be able to see them as well. So Josh, if you want to go ahead and play the video on how to place an order, we'll roll with that for a minute.
I'm going to show you how to send your film to Indie using our online ordering system. You'll start here on our homepage, indiefilmlab.com, and at the top of the screen, you'll select Place an Order, which will take you to this page. And here at the top, you see you can select Process and Scan, Scan Only if you're going to be sending us film that's already been processed, Process Only, if you just want for us to process your film and send it back to you. But you see, process and scan has already been selected for us. So we're going to pretend that I have a couple of rolls that we're going to send in to Indy, and we'll place that order together so I can show you how the system works. Next, I'm going to choose what chemistry we're going to use. So my first roll is colors, so I'll select C41. Next, I'll select the size. 35 millimeter is the size of the roll that I'm sending in. And then I can add any pushes that I'd like. So if I want the film to be pushed in processing, I would add that in here. Next, I'll select which scanner I'd like, as well as which resolution I'd want my film scanned at. So we see here I've got Noritsu and Frontier. I'll select Noritsu, and you'll notice the scan sizes available to us will update based on both what size film I'm sending in as well as which scanner I've selected. So I'm going to select large. Pro correction and JPEG is already selected for us, but if I wanted to change those, I can do so on the right-hand side of those boxes. Next, I can add a note here. So this will help me identify my rolls by either film stock or the content, and then I can also write a short note to the lab. If I have any other rolls that match this exact criteria, so color 35 millimeter film that I want scanned on the Noritsu, large, with corrections and JPEGs, then I could hit that plus button right there and add additional rolls. But for the purposes of this example, we'll say we just have one roll and go ahead and add that to the cart. You'll see a dialog comes up, and it gives us the choice to either proceed to checkout or add additional rolls. So we'll go ahead and add another roll. Our next roll we'll say is black and white. So I will select black and white and then enter in all the additional information about this roll. A quick note here about black and white film as I go through and add this. True black and white film has to be dusted in Photoshop frame by frame, so it has to be corrected, and you can't change your correction setting from corrected from pro corrections to uncorrected. So once I've added my note, I'll add that roll to the cart. And before we proceed to checkout, I'll point out that here in this area on the right-hand side of the screen, this has been updating as we've been placing our order, and you can see a preview of what your order is. Now on the following screen, if we're a returning Indie customer, we can log in, but as a new customer, you'll create an account by entering your first and last name, email address, and creating a password. And that's the password that you'll use to log into your account moving forward. But if you forget it, no worries. Your email address will get you in. You hit forgot password, and that will send a confirmation email to your account password. Now on this page, since we've created our account, we can go ahead and check out. We'll finish all of the other details that we need to place our order. So at the top, you can see return negatives is already selected. You also have the option to either have your negatives discarded or archived with the film hound. Next, I'm going to enter in all of the payment information as well as our billing information. And of course, if my return address to have my negatives mailed back to me, if that is the same, then I would just leave this check mark here, or I can uncheck it if I do need to change my shipping address. Next, I'll select place order, and that submits your order directly to Indie, so we know your film is coming to us. The next dialog box that's going to come up gives me the opportunity to review and print my order form, which you'll need to do to send along with your film. So once that's selected, you can review your order form and make sure everything looks correct, and then you will print that off and send it to Indie. If you do not have access to a printer, then you can always send your film to Indie with your name, email address, contact information, and order number inside your package, so that when your film gets to us, we will be able to identify it as yours. Once you've got all that together and ready to be shipped, you will send it to us here in Montgomery, and that's it.
So do you guys have any questions about anything that we've talked about? Ryan, you back from the restroom?
Yeah, look at my cat.
I can't see anybody. I'm still on the, maybe I can get out of here now. Jackie, can I get out of here now? And I can just see everybody's face, beautiful face.
Yeah, absolutely. You can stop the screen share. And Josh, if you will tap the chat dialog box at the bottom once you stop your screen share, then you can see everybody.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And you need to take the sticky note off your camera, Josh. There you are. And can you see the chat now as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can.
Okay, great. All right, awesome. So I think our questions that came up started with Anne. So if y'all will scroll back to that one, if I'm using, I believe X stands for expired Portra 400 and set the camera ISO to 200, what setting do I put in the light meter? 200 ISO to meter correctly?
So it expired portrait and you're setting your camera ISO to 200. Yeah, set your meter to 200 too. So you make sure you're overexposing. That sounds right. You still there?
All right.
I vote yes for that one.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is a personal preference thing, but April asked, if I'm not using my film for professional reasons, do you keep the negatives or do you discard them?
Oh my God, yes, that breaks my heart. Yes, keep your negatives. Someday your grandkids will want to find them and see them.
That's a good point. Like, there's so many wedding rolls that at the end of it, I would come home and have like 6 shots or whatever. And I just would shoot my kids and I'd get and those digital files probably aren't going to be around, but the negatives stored in a box will, and they'll find them and say, whoa, that's how skinny dad was.
Josh and Ryan, have you had any focus or calibration issues with the Mamiya 7 II?
No, but I know there's shops that will still work on them. I haven't had mine all that long. Whoa, you've had it 3 years and had to have the focus calibrated 4 times. That's crazy. I don't know if that, maybe it can get knocked out of alignment if you have it in a camera bag and it's banging around or something. That's just good advice for me to take care of it. I haven't had any issues yet, but I've only had that camera about a year.
I've never had that camera, so I don't know how that works. I had my Leica get knocked out of adjustment once, but that was once a long time ago. But the GF670 never got knocked out. That everything was pretty tack sharp. Tips on
You guys have
shooting
any
expired
film?
I never really shoot expired film, and when I have, I just shoot it at. They say a stop a decade, but
yeah, if you want it to look good, overexpose it. But sometimes I'll just shoot expired film to get an expired film look.
Embrace unpredictability. When you start shooting, expired film or like fun films like Lomo, you just have to sort of embrace the process and know that it's going to be a little bit unpredictable.
Yeah, I would never personally. I mean, do whatever you want. I would never try to get a really clean, perfect shot with expired film. Just know that it could be, there's no telling how that film was. I found a roll of 1950s Kodak at a flea market. I think I gave it to you, Ryan. I gave it to somebody and turned out cool. I was like, man, I should have shot it.
Ryan Murray said, I bought some Portra 400 about a month ago and haven't put it in the fridge till today. Is that a problem? No. I've had film that I didn't start refrigerating for months and months and months. You're totally fine.
I actually never refrigerate any of my film. It's always just in a 72 degree. It's always fine. Never have any problem. And I even like when I go to a wedding in summer and I have it thrown in my bag and I'll throw the bag in the car. It's still fine. I've never had any issues with any of that. Although we've had clients have issues with that. And it's mainly from like, I'll see a shot of like the beach and it's like moisture damage. What's wrong? I'm like, well, you're at the beach. Maybe it's stayed out too long or got too close to the ocean water or whatever. We've had problems with that, but I can tell like in the photo, I'm like, oh, you're at the beach. I see what went down.
Jackie Wallace asked, does Indy keep our film scans for a certain amount of time in case we need to make changes? And I can answer this question. So your negatives themselves, we will send back to you after, usually a couple weeks after you've received your scans. So we will email you a link to a digital gallery so you can view your scans and download them directly from that gallery. So we give you an opportunity to review them before we actually mail your film back to you. But usually within about 2 weeks of you having your images, your film is going to be sent back to you, unless you choose to have it discarded or archived with a film hound. Either way, after that 2-week window, like your film essentially isn't in our hands anymore. So time is sort of the essence there. Like if you have questions or if you need any tweaks, to write back quickly is better than to wait an indefinite amount of time. But that's one of the advantages to the PicTime galleries that we use to share your images to you, because as soon as you get the email, you can view them on your phone. So you can look at them right away and reach out if you got questions or anything, because we're happy to answer. If it's something that's you're unfamiliar with, you don't know what happened, you had a mechanical error, that kind of thing, we're happy to answer those questions. So you can always reply to that email.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. Well, I'm so glad that you guys hopped on here with us. Thank you. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up questions and wrap up everything. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you, Josh. And thank you, Ryan. And special shout out to Macbeth. She was definitely the star of the show. So thank you all so much for joining us. We will be sharing the video of this after the fact, so you can both watch it and share it with friends. And reach out if you've got questions, orders at Indie Film Lab, and we will be doing more of these. So, we would love to hear your feedback. And if you've got any topics that you want us to do classes on, please let us know. You can email me. I'm Jackie at Indie Film Lab. We've got Josh at Indie Film Lab, or orders at Indie Film Lab kind of catches everything. So we would love to hear from you guys. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. And if there's something like someone wanted to go much deeper on like that metering, I mean, there's honestly like 3 or 4 hours worth of information. I'd be happy to do private mentoring about that if someone wanted like the full explanation. It's really hard. Metering, the thing is that always sticks with me is like, wow, this is hard to not have 2 hours to do.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
Thank y'all so much.
Awesome.
Appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Thank you guys so much. We appreciate y'all.
Make
We'll
sure
be in
you
touch
save
soon.
it. Don't hit delete at the end. We'll have to start immediately over.
Today.
Yeah,
we
you
have to do
got
it
a few hours.
Right, yeah.
Bye,
All right,
everybody.
awesome. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.